Chapter 220. The two groups felt at odds as well, so they slowed down before dusk, waiting for Gu Qing and the others to catch up. "What do you want to do?" asked Tong Lu while staring into Gu Qing's eyes. "It has nothing to do with you," said Gu Qing. Tong Lu shot him a cold glance, but didn't say anything. He came to the snowland to participate in the cultivation tournament this year for no other purpose than to relive his old memories and to commemorate his friendship with Lo Huainan. Since it had nothing to do with Tong Lu's group, it must have something to do with Xiang Wanshu of Zhongzhou School. The gazes shifted back and forth between the two of them. The atmosphere was a bit tense. Because of the story of Lo Huainan, and because Jing Jiao and Bai Zhao didn't come back, the relationship between the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou School had reached its best period in history. However, this process had come to an abrupt end 3 years ago. It was because Lo Huainan had died, and the killer was an abandoned disciple of Aoyama. Though this incident had nothing to do with the Aoyama sect, its influence couldn't be erased. "May I ask why you are following us, cultivationist Gu?" Xiang Wanshu looked at Gu Qing cautiously. Gu Qing said, "The world is so big. I just want to travel around." Xiang Wanshu felt helpless, thinking that the cultivationists on Liangwang Peak all said that Gu Qing had a calm and amiable temperament, but he had inherited the habits of the people of Shinma Peak. How could he say such an unreasonable thing so calmly? Gu Qing felt helpless as well, thinking that if his master didn't have a magic locator with him, he wouldn't have followed him. Xiang Wanshu signaled Gu Qing to follow him to a place a bit further away, asking in a hushed voice, "What do you want to do?" "I want to do whatever you want to do," said Gu Qing. Xiang Wanshu said, "Their corpses are not necessarily together. Have you forgotten what Big Brother Luo said about the last avalanche? Those are snow worms." Gu Qing said, "You mean that they have all been eaten by the snow worms, and now not even a hair can be found?" Xiang Wanshu was a bit upset, saying, "You said it yourself." Gu Qing said, "Since your sex locator can still be used, it means that the snow worms can't digest everything." Xiang Wanshu said, "That's right. The 10,000-mile seal is probably with the locating magic treasure." Gu Qing patted him on the shoulder and said, "Have you ever thought that my thoughtless sword might be together?" Xiang Wanshu was taken aback and said, "It makes sense." Gu Qing looked at the sky and said, "Let's take a rest first. Shall we go together tomorrow?" "That's fine," said Xiang Wanshu. With the reputation of the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou School, there was no need to worry that the young cultivators participating in the cultivation tournament would dare to snatch the 10,000-mile seal and the thoughtless sword. However, they had to be careful. It was a quiet night. The morning sun rose, and the people woke up. They suddenly felt that the morning sun was brighter that day than it was a few days ago. Suddenly, someone yelled and jumped up, pointing to the north. The people looked toward the north, shocked, speechless. The surrounding black mountains were so clear, and the morning sunlight dyed the sky. The cold fog in the mountains had disappeared overnight. Gu Qing walked to Xiang Wanshu's side and said with a smile, "Finally, we can go faster." Xiang Wanshu smiled back, and, as he was about to say something, he suddenly felt a vibration at his waist. Lowering his head to look, he saw the small green bamboo board glowing. The expression on Xiang Wanshu's face changed, and he didn't have time to say anything. He called out a piece of green glass and flew up into the air, turning into a flowing light instantly. The expression on Gu Qing's face changed slightly, and he rode his sword without hesitation, turning into a flash of sword light in an instant. Seeing this scene, his companions in the snowland were surprised and curious, wondering what had happened to make him so anxious. Tong Lu looked at the distance, raising his eyebrows slightly, thinking that Gu Qing's sword light could still catch up with Xiang Wanshu after he employed the escape method of heaven and earth. Could it be that he had already reached the upper state of the undefeated? In the field outside Whitetown, Fang Jingtian was looking at the north, the wrinkles on his face illuminated by the morning sun, his eyes still as calm as an ancient well without ripples. A few miles away, Ren Qianzhu was also looking at the north, his expression grave. What were these two important figures of the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou School looking at? Suddenly, Fang Jingtian narrowed his eyes. Send a message to the sect master. After a moment of silence, he said to the disciples behind him, I've found him. Everything is fine. A moment later, Ren Xianzhu said the same thing to the disciples behind him. The flowing light from the green glass and the sword light flew toward the outside of the Black Mountains, separated by a distance of 100 feet. How far is it? Asked Gu Qing. Xiang Wanshu's spiritual awareness fell on the small green bamboo board, and he said a moment later, very far. No matter how steady Gu Qing's temperament was, he was annoyed, thinking that the magic treasures of the Zhongzhou school were indeed impressive, but difficult to use. Xiang Wanshu glanced at him, thinking that Jing Jiu had surpassed him less than 10 years after he entered the Shenma Peak, and couldn't help but feel a bit envious. The former residents of the immortal Jingyang indeed had a magical aura. It was unclear whether it was because of the cold fog or something else, but the chaotic wind was much quieter. The two of them took the risk and flew out of the Black Mountains, arriving at the desolate snowland. The eerie environment didn't slow them down a bit. The scorching sun hung high in the sky, but it didn't give them any warmth because the coldness in front of them had suddenly increased. As Gu Qing and Xiang Wanshu landed on the snowland, they found a cliff wall in front of them, extremely steep and bottomless. The most frightening part was that it was filled with the cold fog. Where exactly is it? Asked Gu Qing. Xiang Wanshu held the small green bamboo board tightly and felt it for a moment, then pointed to a spot on the cliff wall in the cold fog, saying right there, Is she still alive? Asked Gu Qing in a trembling voice. Big sister is still alive, yelled Xiang Wanshu, his face full of joy. Ah! Gu Qing let out a joyful cry. Xiang Wanshu's mind was occupied by the pleasant surprise, but he still felt it strange, wondering why Xiang Wanshu was happier than he was when he only knew that Big Sister was still alive, but he didn't know about Jing Jiu's condition. Gu Qing didn't know what Xiang Wanshu was thinking, but his logic was clear. Since his big sister by Zhao was still alive, how could his master be dead? What are you hesitating for? He yelled. Let's save them. Xiang Wanshu said. The cold fog is blocking the entrance of the cave. How can we save them? Gu Qing asked. How deep is it if we break through the mountain directly? Xiang Wanshu observed the cliff wall and said, It's about 30 yards away. If we break through it from here, it might collapse. It's too dangerous. Gu Qing didn't want to negotiate with this bookworm any longer, riding his sword and retreating a few hundred yards away. Sitting cross-legged in the snow, he extended his sword fingers swiftly. The flying sword slashed toward the surface of the snowland. Whoosh! A great deal of ice and snow and hard soil were cut open by the flying sword, and a trench several feet deep appeared on the ground. Xiang Wanshu understood what Jing Jiu meant after a moment of bewilderment. He flew back hastily and sat cross-legged by Jing Jiu's side, activating his spiritual awareness and calling out the magic treasures to attack the surface of the snowland. The young cultivation practitioners participating in the cultivation tournament received the news and rushed over one after another, and they saw a strange scene. Xiang Wanshu and Gu Qing sat cross-legged in the snow, their eyes closed. The sword lights and flowing lights bombarded the ground incessantly, and a deep trench about 10 feet wide had been dug out on the surface of the snowland, leading to the deep underground. What were they doing? Young Yuan was the first to react, calling out his flying sword and slashing it toward the ground with a strange cry. Soon after, the disciples of Aoyama and Zhongzhou School also realized what was going on, calling out their flying swords and magic treasures to attack the ground. Even the disciples of other sects had figured out what was going on and started to help. Tong Lu didn't help, standing in the distance and looking at the increasingly deep and long trench. His expression was complicated, and it was unclear what he was thinking. Because they were worried that the cliff wall would collapse, Gu Qing and Xiang Wanshu chose a shallow angle, which meant that they had to dig a long slope. Moreover, the underground of the snowland had been eroded by the cold fog all year round, so it was frozen solid, especially those rocks, which were as hard as steel. Even the sharp flying swords and powerful magic treasures couldn't do much damage to them. Fortunately, more and more young cultivation practitioners came to the scene, and it took them a few hours to get close to the edge of the cliff. Gu Qing and Xiang Wanshu held on for the longest time. Jin Yuan had used up too much energy, his face pale. A crack appeared on the cliff wall at the end of the trench. "Be careful," Gu Qing yelled. No sooner had he said this than the crack expanded at a visible speed. The heavy rocks fell down, giving off a deep thud. The young cultivation practitioners stepped back in tandem. Gu Qing, Xiang Wanshu, and Young Yuan walked to the front of the crowd. The crack grew larger and larger, until the upper half of the cliff wall had collapsed. Boom! The snowland quaked, and the rocks on the ground rolled everywhere. The smoke and dust rose up, covering the sky. After a long while, the smoke and dust had finally dispersed. Countless gazes were fixed in that direction. There was a hole there. An iron sword was inserted into the hole, burning incessantly, looking like a torch that would never be extinguished in the dark night. Inside the burning iron sword, there was a bamboo chair. Looking at the bamboo chair, Gu Qing's eyes were a bit moist. Lying on the bamboo chair, Jing Jiu looked at the crowd. His line of sight moved up and fell on Gu Qing. Chapter 221. Gu Qing was taken aback, and then he couldn't help but laugh out. Young Yuan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The rest of the disciples of Aoyama yelled with a smile, "Greetings to Senior Master." The disciples of other sects also laughed. Ha ha! The cheerful laughter echoed in the snowland, and the cold fog on the other side of the cliff wall seemed to have retreated a bit. The disciples of Zhongzhou School were also very happy, but why didn't they see their big sister? Xiang Wanshu dashed toward the inside of the cave. He cupped his hands to greet Jingjiu when he passed by him. Gu Qing walked into the cave and knelt down before Jingjiu, knocking his head on the ground. "Get up," said Jingjiu. Gu Qing got up and looked at Jingjiu's face. He was surprised to find that Jingjiu was thinner than before. If he were a regular cultivation practitioner, he would have some problems after being isolated from the outside world for 6 years, even if he didn't freeze to death. Cultivating without eating couldn't solve all the problems. Yet, Gu Qing knew that his master didn't need it. His sight fell on Jingjiu's cloth, and he was startled again. This white cloth from the top of the Shenma Peak could resist the attacks of water and fire, and the common flying swords couldn't even break it. But it was badly damaged, with many cuts on the edges. How did he survive the 6 years if the cold fog was so formidable? Gu Qing couldn't care less about it. He released his sword discernment to check Jingjiu's body, even though he knew it was an offense. Gu Qing was even more shocked. Jingjiu's sword source was almost exhausted, and his body was extremely weak. Gu Qing approached him hastily and held his hand. He had intended to ask Jingjiu why he didn't use the thoughtless sword to cut open the cliff wall after hearing their voices, instead of enduring the deafening noises. Was it because Jingjiu thought it would look good to appear on the bamboo chair? Now he realized that Jingjiu couldn't move at all. 100 herb pill. Gu Qing yelled in a low voice. Young Yuan had already entered the cave. Hearing this, he hurried to take out the elixir. Jingjiu took the pill and swallowed it. Seeing the anxious expressions on their faces, he was touched and prepared to explain that he was fine. Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the cave. Gu Qing and Young Yuan turned around and were also shocked by what they saw. Leaning against the stone wall, there was a layer of translucent leather. It covered a large area, and from the lines on it, it looked like the corpse of a withered snowworm. If it was this big after it dried up, then how terrifying would it have been when it was alive? However, it was not the snowworm that caused the disciples of the provincial sect to cry out in surprise, but an object in the corner of the cliff cave. It was something similar to a cocoon formed by countless extremely thin silk threads. Those silk threads were like gold or jade, and even with divine sense, it was impossible to tell what material they were made of. Through the fine threads, he could vaguely see a figure sitting cross-legged in the cocoon, seemingly adjusting his breathing and circulating his energy. Who else could it be? That figure was none other than Bai Zhao, whom the disciples of the Zhongzhou school had been searching for. At the moment, Bai Zhao's condition was obviously different, as if he was practicing a special magic method. Xiang Wanshu and the other disciples of the Zhongzhou school didn't dare act recklessly, and they didn't dare use the magic treasures either. They had asked the disciple to use the broken golden shuttle to try to break one of the silk threads. Unexpectedly, the silk thread that looked like gold or jade didn't break, but a crack appeared on the surface of the broken golden shuttle. It was at this moment that the surprise cry came out. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school looked at Jingjiao. He was the only one who knew what was going on. "It's okay," said Jingjiao. "He'll be out in 2 days." Hearing this, Xiang Wanshu and the others felt relieved, but they were still worried. They sent the message back to the outside of White Town and started setting up the formation outside the cave to strengthen the defense. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school explained the current situation to the young cultivation practitioners of other sects, expressing their gratitude and asking for their understanding, though they didn't tell them the details. Those young cultivation practitioners understood and expressed that it was okay. They even volunteered to patrol the outer part of the cave. Tong Lu was still standing in the distance, looking at the busy cliff cave in the deep end of the tunnel, feeling more and more complicated. In the cliff cave, Gu Qing suddenly found that the iron sword was still burning, so he reminded Jing Jiao hastily. Jing Jiao willed it to extinguish the flame on the iron sword. Looking at the iron sword, he felt a bit uncomfortable. Having been burning for 6 years, he had gotten used to the iron sword being a torch, and he even felt that the iron sword should be like that. It was then that he remembered that the iron sword didn't have a flame. A gust of wind came in from the outside of the cliff cave, and he realized that not all the wind was so cold. Thinking of all this, he fell asleep. Gu Qing and Yang Yuan stayed by his side the entire time, not leaving his side for even an inch. It was unclear whether it was because of the effect of the 100-herb pill or because the cold fog had left, but Jingjiao's face had gradually turned ruddy. He woke up in the deepest part of the night and found that the surroundings were no longer as quiet as they had been in the past 6 years. Instead, there were many whispers. He checked his body to make sure that he was all right, got up from the bamboo chair, and walked out of the cave. Gu Qing and Yang Yuan were also extremely tired, dozing against the bamboo chair. Hearing the noise, they immediately woke up and got up. "You two stay here. Don't go too far. I'm going out to relax my body," Jing Jiao said. Gu Qing didn't want to give in. Holding his arm, he looked at the disciples of Zhongzhou school in the cave and said in a low voice, "Master, your sword source is almost gone." Jing Jiao said, "It's always like this. It's okay." He was telling the truth. The cold fog slowed down everything in heaven and earth. Even the spiritual energy of heaven and earth seemed to have solidified, making it difficult to sense and absorb. He calculated clearly that when the cold fog was at its thickest, the speed of absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the cliff cave was less than 3% of what it used to be. He had to maintain the temperature in the cliff cave with the sword fire. Zhen Yuan consumed a lot of spiritual energy, so he couldn't keep Zhen Yuan recovering at this speed. Therefore, he could only use as much as he could recover. In other words, during the past 6 years, his Zhen Yuan had never been full. It could even be said that it had always been operating at the lowest level with difficulty. The cold fog also had something to do with the weakness of his body, because everything would slow down. But it really didn't matter. He just needed to move around for a while to recover. Gu Qing was still worried about Jing Jiao and wouldn't let him walk alone in the darkness of the night. Jing Jiao had no choice but to let him follow him. Gu Qing signaled Yang Yuan to guard the cave with his eyes and supported Jing Jiao to walk out of the cave. Several disciples of Zhongzhou school were maintaining the formation outside the cave. Seeing Jing Jiao, they quickly stood up and bowed to him. Supporting Jing Jiao, Gu Qing walked out of the ramp and came to the snowland. Seeing them, the young cultivators who participated in the cultivation tournament also stood up. This was their respect for Jing Jiao. Regardless of the story told by Luo Huainan, the fact that he could survive in such a dreadful cold fog for 6 years made him worthy of everyone's respect. What shocked these young cultivators more was that Jingjiu was so calm after being rescued that he didn't seem to care about all the sufferings. Who wouldn't admire his willpower? What they didn't know was that Jingjiu was used to such a secluded life, and he was not used to the hustle and bustle of the night. Somewhere in the snowland, there was no one around. The dark clouds strangely dispersed, sprinkling starlight on the ground. The ground was so white that it was dazzling. Jingjiu glanced at Gu Qing, knowing that the masters of various sects would arrive soon. Gu Qing had to finish his story as soon as possible in case his master made a wrong judgment, because he didn't know what had happened in the past 6 years. First, Jingjiu retold the story told by Luo Huainan in the shortest and most accurate way possible. Chapter 222. I know, Gu Qing said. That's why he died 3 years ago. Jingjiu shot him a glance and asked, those old guys wouldn't do it. How did he die? Gu Qing was startled, wondering how his master could figure it out. Senior Master Liu was determined to do it, he explained. He died because Senior Master Liu was determined to do it. Jingjiu was surprised, thinking that it would take Liu at least 4 years to surpass Luo Huainan. So how could she kill him 3 years ago? Gu Qing told Jingjiu what had happened 3 years ago, without concealing anything. Knowing that Lu Shui and Tong Yin on the other side of the go board were involved in this incident, Jingjiu remained silent for a while, and then signaled him to continue. Gu Qing said, Shui has disappeared, and nobody knows where he is. Senior Master Liu is behind closed doors, preparing to break through the free travel state. Jingjiu said, not bad, but it was unclear which comment he was referring to. Gu Qing didn't forget that important detail, saying, it was the emperor who gave the first child sword to kill Luo Huainan. Jingjiu was surprised, asking, the sword of that old guy in the South Ocean? Yes, Gu Qing said. The immortal sect master went to Cloud Dream Mountain after the incident. Jingjiu said, the center sect master couple should be aware of this matter, and the emperor didn't give you the sword for any other reason. He just wanted to take advantage of the situation. Gu Qing was surprised again, wondering how his master could be so sure of his judgment. Jingjiu thought of something else, and said, the leader of the team was the sect master of Shilai Peak, Fong Jingtian. Hearing this name, Jingjiu recalled what had happened on the night when the fake manor cave of the immortal Jingyang was opened 6 years ago. Nothing, he said after a moment of silence. Having finished the story, the two of them returned to the cliff cave. It was obvious that Bai Zhao was cultivating some kind of cultivation method and had reached a critical moment. The disciples of Zhongzhou School set up a formation outside the cave to prevent anyone from approaching. But of course, they wouldn't stop Jingjiu. If Jingjiu wanted to harm Bai Zhao, he could have killed her at any time during the past 6 years in the snowland. Walking into the cliff cave, Jingjiu signaled Gu Qing and Yang Yuan to take a rest. Then, he walked to a corner and looked up at the snow cocoon. Those fine cocoon threads were like gold or jade. The cocoon did not look completely snow-white, but in his consciousness he was still used to calling it a snow cocoon. That was because the cocoon silk was extracted from the juices of the snowworm's corpses. It was able to insulate Bai Zhao from the cold. It had a lot to do with the fact that Bai Zhao was able to survive in this extreme cold for 6 years. Many luminous pearls had been placed in the cave. The soft light fell on the snow cocoon, illuminating the slender figure inside even more clearly. Jingjiu's eyes were as sharp as swords. He could see through the cocoon's silk and see the girl's closed eyes and pale lips. 6 years ago, he pointed his finger and taught Bai Zhao this Taoist method, just to see if it could help her repair her broken Jindan. He didn't expect that Bai Zhao, who had been cultivating the Cloud Dream Mountain Xingong since childhood, could be so compatible with Shui Yu Nunnery's Taoist method. Without the help of elixirs and crystals, and absorbing the Reiki of heaven and earth was extremely difficult. She had spent 6 years in Samadhi, which was far beyond his imagination. Of course, this kind of Taoist method had the wisdom of Zen master. Using one's heart to prove one's thoughts, it required less from the outside world than other Taoist methods. The girl's lips gradually turned red. After confirming that everything was fine, Jingjiu walked to the other side of the cliff cave. The other side of the cliff cave was facing a precipice. The cold fog in the night was still there, blowing like countless steel needles. Jingjiu was used to this kind of coldness, so he looked down with a calm expression. Deep in the cold fog, there was wind and snow, but it was thousands of feet away from the entrance of the cave, so it couldn't affect this place. The snow worms in the cliff wall had already crawled out of the cave and climbed into the depths of the fog along the rock wall. Their juice was still glistening on the rock wall. Tens of thousands of snow-foot monsters were heading north at a high speed in the depths of the cold fog. He saw many monsters that he had never seen before, and he even saw a few white-furred snow monsters hopping like rabbits. He stretched out his hand into the cold wind outside the cliff. With a thought, a snow beetle appeared in his palm. Compared to 6 years ago, this snow beetle didn't grow bigger, but it was no longer transparent, and it was emitting coldness all over. Its carapace seemed to be made of 10,000-year-old ice jade, giving people a feeling that it was indestructible. The moment he turned his hand, the snow beetle, which had been pretending to be dead, suddenly woke up. It stretched out its 6 bamboo-like white limbs and hugged his palm tightly, making a hurried sound that sounded like ice and snow hitting the cliff wall. Sensing its intention, Jingjiu was a bit surprised, wondering why it wanted to follow him. Aoyama wasn't hot, but it wasn't cold either, so it was definitely not suitable for the creatures of the snowy country to live in. But since the snow beetle wanted to go back with him, he didn't mind, so he put it back. Then, he looked up to the north. His gaze passed through the night, the cold fog, and the violent snowstorm in the distance, and fell on the lone peak tens of thousands of miles away. Since 3 years ago, that willpower had become much calmer, no longer mad, and no longer so sensitive. He felt even worse, because as long as the willpower to devour everything was not removed, the calmer it was, the more terrifying it would be. He knew what his senior brother wanted him to see. "I'm leaving," he said to the lone peak in the distance. The lone peak didn't respond. Jingjiu turned around and went back into the cliff cave. As the night deepened, Guqin woke up and took out a 100-herb pill to feed to Jingjiu. Then he walked out of the cave and sat down by Xiang Wanshu, asking, "What did they say?" "They told us to be careful and bring them back as soon as possible," said Xiang Wanshu. Guqin was startled, asking, "Nobody came?" "No." Xiang Wanshu turned his head to look at the cliff cave, saying sentimentally, "I wonder how they have survived all these years." Thinking of his master's tattered white cloth and weak body, Guqin sighed. "Yeah." Xiang Wanshu got closer to him and asked in a low voice, "Jingjiu, did senior master tell us what's going on with my big sister?" Guqin said, "My master said she's fine, so she's fine. Don't worry." The next day, the snow cocoon in the cliff cave had undergone a subtle change. When the wind blew over, the surface of the cocoon rippled like the surface of water, as if it was softening. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school noticed the change, feeling even more nervous. Guqin was surprised to find out that the masters of the two sects didn't intend to come over. It was dusk. The twilight shone on the precipice. Jingjiu stood up and put away the bamboo chair, walking toward the outside of the cliff cave. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school who had formed the formation outside the cave were startled, wondering where he was going. Xiang Wanshu was the first to react, looking into the cave nervously. A thread floated up from the surface of the snow cocoon, swaying in the wind. It looked like a beautiful moth in the twilight, trying to break off the thread behind it. Chapter 223. The silk of the cocoon was pulled longer and longer, floating in the air. The snow cocoon was pulled by the force, spinning slowly and then spinning faster and faster. More and more golden and jade-like cocoon silk was pulled out, filling the whole cliff cave, looking like the burning snow under the setting sun. In the end, all the silk of the snow cocoon had been pulled out, revealing the scene inside. Bai Zhao was sitting cross-legged in the air amidst the silk of the snow cocoon. She landed slowly, her eyes still closed. On the way down, she opened her eyes slowly and woke up, standing on the ground with her feet on the ground. A fresh energy came out from her body and spread in all directions, bringing up a gentle wind. The silk of the cocoon danced faster and faster, until it broke into pieces and flew in all directions like moths, disappearing into the nothingness. She walked toward the outside of the cave, her white dress fluttering, looking like a fairy lady. Seeing this scene, the people outside the cave were shocked speechless. Sensing the energy, Xiang Wanshu couldn't help but feel delighted. "Congratulations, big sister," he said while bowing to her. The disciples of Zhongzhou school bowed to her. The congratulatory voices could be heard from the crowd in the distance. Bai Zhao had reached the upper limit of the golden pill state. It was almost a myth that one could survive in such a cold and cruel environment, not to mention continue cultivating and breaking through the state. It was now that Bai Zhao woke up and understood the situation. Yet, she didn't talk to Xiang Wanshu or his colleagues, but looked at the crowd. Finally, her line of sight fell outside the crowd. The crowd parted to form a path. At the end of this path was Jing Jiao. Lo Huainan had died 3 years ago. The story he told was still remembered by many people. In that story, there was a needless need for words to go through life and death together, a strong bond, and a pair of young cultivation practitioners who hadn't become cultivation partners yet. Bai Zhao walked toward Jingjiao. Xiang Wanshu and other disciples of Zhongzhou school were worried, following behind her. The crowd parted to form a wider path. Bai Zhao came before Jingjiao and bowed to the ground, saying nothing. This was a big gesture. Indeed, there was no need for words. People roughly understood what was going on. Xiang Wanshu and other disciples of the Zhongzhou school bowed to Jingjiao to express their gratitude. The cold fog didn't retreat any further, hovering in front of the cliff without dispersing. In addition, the cultivation tournament of the Plum meeting had come to an end because of such a significant event. None of the young disciples who participated in the cultivation tournament expressed any dissatisfaction. They left the snowland on the same day on the cloud boat of Zhongzhou school. All the important figures of the cultivation circle were waiting in the field. Even the Duke of He had come from Zhaoga City overnight. Under the watchful eyes of countless people, the cloud boat slowly landed on the plains. Jingjiao and Bai Zhao walked in front of the crowd. Behind them was White City. The two of them were dressed in white. Looking at this scene, Duke of He revealed a gratified smile on his face. He whispered a few words to Fong Jingtian and Rin Qianzhu beside him, causing the people around them to laugh. The people waiting in the field cheered. In such a cold world, the person whom the whole of Chaotian thought to be dead had survived. This was a legend. Moreover, the story of Lo Huainan had made the image of Jingjiao and Bai Zhao as a couple deeply rooted in people's hearts. Gu Qing shot a glance at Young Yuan, thinking that he was his master. Young Yuan felt indignant, thinking that he was his master. The courtyard in the field was no different from 6 years ago. It looked brand new after being cleaned by magic. There were no other people in the quiet courtyard. Even the disciples of Aoyama and Zhongzhou school were kept outside. The only people here were the important figures of the cultivation circle, such as Duke of He and Fong Jingtian. They needed to find out what had happened to Jingjiao and Bai Zhao. It all started from a story of Lo Huainan. Bai Zhao shot a glance at Jingjiao. Jingjiao said, "It's not important." Duke of He thought of something, but didn't ask further. The rest of the sect masters and elders of various sects were not idiots, since they had reached their current cultivation states. Though they didn't know what Bai Zhao's silence and Jingjiao's statement meant, they didn't ask further, since it was likely to be related to Zhongzhou school. Monk Duhai asked concernedly, "How did you two survive?" If this question were asked by anyone else, it would be misunderstood as a provocation or something else, but nobody would doubt the intention of the principal justice of Guochang Temple. Jingjiao didn't say anything. Bai Zhao shot a glance at Jingjiao and said, "After being trapped in the cliff cave, I was seriously injured and my Jindan was about to break. Big brother Jingjiao used the sword fire to warm me up and taught me the cultivation method. I meditated and didn't wake up until today. It was not until then that Rin Qianju realized that the beloved daughter of the sect master had encountered such a problem. He asked worriedly, "How is she now?" "She's fine now," Bai Zhao said in a low voice. The sect masters and elders of various sects were shocked speechless, wondering what kind of disaster it was to have the Jindan broken, and how could it be healed by itself in such a cold environment. Duke of He was very curious, asking, "What kind of cultivation method is so magical?" As soon as he said it, he realized he had made a slip of the tongue. The cultivation method was the biggest secret of a cultivation practitioner, so how could it be mentioned casually? So he waved his hand hurriedly to signal Bai Zhao to ignore it. Bai Zhao used such a simple sentence to describe being trapped in the cold fog for 6 years. But if one thought about it carefully, one would naturally understand the difficulties and dangers involved. Many people turned to look at Jingjiao. The cold fog was so powerful. If he wanted to use the sword fire to warm up the cliff cave, wouldn't he have to stop for even a moment? Zhen Yuan's sword fire was consumed so quickly, but he actually managed to hold on for 6 years? How abundant was his sword source? How strong was his willpower? It was truly unimaginable. My friend Jing is indeed a genius in swordsmanship of the Aoyama sect, Duke of He praised. The others also exclaimed in admiration, but they also felt a bit regretful. In these 6 years, Jing Jiao had to ensure that the sword fire would not be extinguished, so he naturally couldn't cultivate. Presumably, his cultivation state had stagnated. "What state are you in now?" It was Fang Jingtian who asked. Jing Jiao glanced at him and said, "The undefeated middle school." The influential figures thought it was as they expected, feeling even more regretful. "Hurry up and take a rest. The path of cultivation is long and endless. 6 years of delay is nothing." Duke of He patted Jing Jiao's shoulder to comfort him. Jing Jiao glanced at the hand on his shoulder, feeling a bit uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. In the field outside Whitetown, in the courtyard, sitting in a bamboo chair, Jing Jiao looked at Gu Qing and Yang Yuan in front of him and asked, "Did Fang Jingtian behave strangely on the way here?" Yang Yuan felt a bit uneasy, thinking that even though Jing Jiao was the personal disciple of senior Grandmaster Jing Yang and of the same generation, it was still inappropriate for him to call the master of Shilai Peak by his name. What if his colleagues in the front yard heard it? Chapter 2:24. Jing Jiao was thinking about what had happened earlier. Fang Jingtian was the master of Shilai Peak in Aoyama, so of course he should care about him. But what did he mean by asking about his cultivation state in front of so many people? Many things in the world seemed difficult to solve, but they could be calculated, at least roughly. But it was tiring. Jing Jiao didn't think it was a big deal, so he didn't want to spend his energy calculating it. As he was about to stop thinking about it, he suddenly looked at Gu Qing's face and remembered what he had told Zhao Lei years ago. Jing Jiao asked Yang Yuan to wait in the room, and then he told Gu Qing everything from beginning to end. It was the first time that Gu Qing learned that Fang Jingtian had tried to kill Jing Jiao twice. He was so shocked that his face turned pale. "Have you reported it to the sect master?" he asked. Fang Jingtian was the master of Shilai Peak and enjoyed a high status in Aoyama's sect. Only the sect master and the sword justice had the right to punish him. Jing Jiao said he wouldn't even kill Lo Huainan without any evidence, let alone his young brother. Gu Qing thought, "What do you want me to do by telling me these things?" Jing Jiao said, "Sort out these things, and then figure out what he might do and what we should do." Having said that, Jing Jiao got up and walked into the room. Yang Yuan was still waiting inside. Gu Qing knew what Jing Jiao wanted to say to Yang Yuan, but he didn't care. Thinking of the task his master assigned to him, he couldn't help but feel distressed. Yang Yuan left. Jing Jiao walked to the window and looked out of the courtyard. The first thing he saw was Whitetown. What he saw was the temple. He saw the south, but he didn't know where his big brother was. In Jui City, the cold fog in the north gradually dispersed, and the already bustling city regained its liveliness. All the restaurants and inns were already full of customers, and the steam from the shredded meat pots was everywhere. In a private room of a restaurant, there was a hot pot on the table. There was red and white soup boiling in the pot, and the ingredients inside were scattered all over the place. The short and skinny old man rubbed his nose, feeling sick of the smell, and said, "Don't you get tired of eating this thing?" The young man said, "Different ingredients give different tastes. There are thousands of ingredients in the world, so there are thousands of flavors. How can I get bored?" The short and skinny old man picked up some spinach from the soup and swallowed it with the sesame paste and tofu on the plate. He found that it tasted pretty good. He didn't know if it was because he was scalded by the food or because he rubbed too hard, but his nose turned even redder. He asked in a muffled voice, "What are you going to do next?" The young man said, "I'm going to see that kid named Xiaoming." The short old man's expression turned cold as he said, "Are you really going to let him take away my ancestral inheritance?" The young man asked, "The kid of the mysterious dark sect is called Suzai. I like this name very much. I won't be partial. Whoever wins will be your personal disciple. Isn't it appropriate?" The short and skinny old man sneered, saying, "Did you name yourself Insam because you thought your scheme was so good?" The young man wasn't angry, saying with a smile, "You are the third grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, so this name is quite appropriate. Do you want me to give it to you?" The short and skinny old man was quite upset, saying mockingly, "That kid named Jingjiu is still alive. Are you disappointed?" The young man didn't pay any attention to him. He picked up a piece of brain from the soup carefully and put it in his bowl filled with chopped green onions, sesame oil, and garlic paste. The short and skinny old man felt bored, saying, "A pig's brain isn't as tasty as a human's." The young man thought that he was indeed a pig's brain, wondering why he hadn't realized that Jingjiu wasn't him. The next day, the masters and disciples of various sects who had participated in the cultivation tournament returned to their respective mountains. In the early morning, Bai Zhao came to the courtyard of the Aoyama sect. The caretakers and servants who cleaned the courtyard, and the disciples of the Aoyama sect who practiced sword in the morning, were all sensible and tacitly didn't block his way. Young Yuan was a bit hesitant, wondering if he should do something. Gu Qing pulled him away, thinking that they didn't need to worry about the affairs of the elders. Of course, it didn't matter if he wanted to do something in private, but the morning light was so bright. A faint voice came from the other side of the courtyard wall. Young Yuan listened attentively and became anxious when he heard the name, saying she should have called him Senior Brother Jing, but she insisted on calling him Senior Brother Jing. What is she up to? I should have been very happy. Bai Zhao said softly, "I've survived, and it feels like my broken golden pill has been repaired after a nap, and I might even be able to form a Yuanying in a few years. But why do I feel a bit unhappy?" Jingjiu really didn't understand, asking why. "I didn't expect that the fog would recede when I woke up after I entered the trance." Bai Zhao continued, "If I had woken up 1 year earlier, no, even dozens of days earlier, it would have been much better." Jingjiu still didn't understand, asking, "What do you mean?" Bai Zhao said softly, "Everything seems to have stopped 6 years ago. If I could have woken up 1 day earlier, I would have known more about you. That would have been much better." He didn't say a word to express his affection. Jingjiu understood, but he thought it was a tricky matter. The path toward heaven is long and endless. "We will meet again if we have the chance," he said. This was a refusal or an evasion, and it wasn't a euphemistic way for smart people like them. Bai Zhao looked at Jingjiu in a daze. The cold fog had receded. The field outside White Town was not as cold as it had been a few years ago, but the wind was still a bit chilly. Her hair was fluttering by her ears, looking like a small white flower shivering in the wind like a sensei, looking extremely delicate. As Jingjiu was about to say something, she tucked her hair behind her ears and said softly, "Yes, we will meet again very soon." Jingjiu wondered what she meant. Big brother Luo is dead, but I will definitely tell my parents the truth of this matter. Bai Zhao changed the topic naturally. "Of course," said Jingjiu. Bai Zhao thought of something and said with a smile, "It seems that you and Lu Shui are on good terms, not like what the rumors say." Jingjiu thought that Tong Yin was on good terms with you, but you don't know the whole truth of this matter, so it's not convenient for me to tell you. Someone knocked on the courtyard door. and Gu Qing's voice rang out outside. Master, Tong Lu from the Western Sea Sword School wants to see you. Tong Lu stared into Jingjiu's eyes and said, I want to have a duel with you. When you return to Aoyama and have a good rest, send a sword letter to me. Why? Asked Jingjiu. Because Lu Shui killed Lo Huainan, said Tong Lu. Having said that, he glanced at Bai Zhao, his eyes full of disappointment. Without saying anything more, he flicked his sleeves and left the courtyard. He knows, said Jingjiu. Yes, otherwise he should be thanking us for letting eldest brother live for 3 more years. Bai Zhao was smart enough to know what he was talking about. I just don't understand why he was so angry when he knew that eldest brother's story was false. Because in the real story, Lo Huainan did us wrong, said Jingjiu, but it had nothing to do with him. His life was saved by Lo Huainan. Why did eldest brother tell him the truth? Asked Bai Zhao. Honestly? Asked Jingjiu. I would have thought so in the past, but now I don't even know what kind of person eldest brother is. Having said that, Bai Zhao fell silent. The morning wind ruffled the hair by her ears again. I don't know either, said Jingjiu. He had only seen Lo Huainan once, separated by 100 zhang of wind and snow. Martial uncle is back. Which martial uncle? Young martial uncle. Martial uncle Jingjiu. Yes. Under the noon sun, the sword-washing stream glowed white, looking more like a jade belt than a golden whip. Countless exclamations rang out in the pavilion by the stream. A dozen or so sword-washing disciples could no longer sit still. They squeezed the window and looked at the sword boat slowly descending from the sky. Chapter 225. I suggest people eat this chapter with a song. This chapter is very short. I thought about it for a long time, but I had to leave it there because I like it that way. Tut-tut. My attitude of striving for perfection is really good. However, I made a mistake in yesterday's chapter. Jingjiu had seen Luo Huainan do it more than once, but he was too lazy to correct it. So let's leave it at that. What does the young senior master look like? The most handsome. Did the young senior master attend classes here like us? Attend classes? Do you see that cliff cave across the way? He was lying there all day, and his colleagues laughed at him for being lazy. They didn't know that he was using his will to nurture his sword. Didn't the masters punish him for not attending classes? At this point, the sword-washing disciples suddenly realized that they were not chatting in the cliff cave, but having a class. They hurried away from the window and returned to their seats, feeling uneasy, afraid that the immortal master would punish them. This class was about the basics of sword, and the immortal master was Lu. To the surprise of the sword-washing disciples, the immortal master wasn't angry. He said with a smile, "Go to the stream if you want to see it. How can you see it clearly from here?" The disciples couldn't believe their ears. After exchanging a few glances, they made sure that the immortal master was telling the truth. They cheered and hurriedly ran out after bowing to him. The immortal master walked to the window and looked at the sword boat in the sky. He stroked his beard with a gratified smile on his face. He used to have a bleak future, but he was called back to the 9 Peaks to cultivate again because of his experience at the South Pine Pavilion. 4 years ago, he finally broke through the state, and now he was teaching at the sword-washing hall. How could he not feel gratified when he saw his former student had become the pride of Aoyama? Similar scenes occurred in other places at the sword-washing hall. Lin Wuji walked out of the classroom with his teaching materials under his arm. He saw Senior Master Mei Li of Qingrong Peak and greeted her with cupped hands. Cheers suddenly came from the stream. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. They felt sentimental and quickened their steps. The lazy youth 12 years ago had come back with such a great reputation. There used to be a cliff by the sword-washing stream. Later, when the 3-foot sword of Shangda Peak suppressed the former peak master of Bihu Peak, it flattened the cliff. Later, at the request of Shuriwa Peak, and with the consent of all the peaks, this patch of cliff was transformed into the sword boat dock. The sword boat slowly descended, casting a huge shadow on the sword-cleansing stream. The stream instantly felt sensei. There were people everywhere by the stream. Lin Wuji, Yao Songzhan, Lei Il Kyung, and dozens of third-generation Aoyama disciples, as well as many sword-washing disciples, bowed in unison, "Welcome back, junior martial uncle." The voice echoed in the valley like thunder, attracting the response of countless monkeys. Gu Qing stood behind Jingjio, smiling as he thought, "Master, would you still complain about the commotion?" Young Yuan's face was flushed, and he felt honored. He waved his hand at junior sister Yushan in the crowd. "All right," Fang Jingtian said with a smile. "Sect leader is still waiting for junior brother Jing at Tianguang Peak." Jingjio didn't want to go to Tianguang Peak. As he was thinking of a reason to refuse, he suddenly sensed something. He turned around and looked at a lonely peak in the deep part of the ocean of clouds. Whoosh! The sword bracelet left his wrist and turned back into the thoughtless sword, heading in that direction after turning into a bright red glow. Seeing this, the smile on Fang Jingtian's face faded away. The disciples of Aoyama by the stream were very surprised. Lin Wuji and Mei Li exchanged a look and saw the surprise and delight in each other's eyes. The youngest cultivator in the free travel state of the Aoyama sect had finally appeared in hundreds of years. Jingjio didn't say anything more to Fang Jingtian. He rode his sword and rose up, followed by Gu Qing and Young Yuan. Under such circumstances, they wouldn't go to Tianguang Peak again. Compared to this matter, the sect master's summons was nothing. The wind was blowing everywhere in Shinma Peak. The forest was whistling in the wind, and the green leaves kept falling, but it couldn't cover the screams of the monkeys. The screams of the monkeys were shrill, but it was not a warning or a sign of fear, but a sign of extreme joy. The door of the hut in the forest wasn't closed, so it was closed and opened by the strong wind, making pa-pa sounds. The palace on the peak was protected by the inhibition, but the leaves were still dancing, and the dust was everywhere. A muffled sound came from the deep part of the manor cave, and the inhibition was lifted. A plume of smoke came out from inside, looking like a yellow dragon. A moment later, Zhao Leu walked out of the manor cave. Her hair was unkempt, and her clothes were covered with dust. She looked very embarrassed, but her eyes were clear. Her eyes were more distinct, and when she looked at them directly, they seemed to be at dusk. A sharp sword spirit was born in her eyes, and then it gradually disappeared. She walked to the edge of the cliff and saw the red light breaking through the air. She naturally reached out her hand and took it. Looking at the thoughtless sword in her hand, she was slightly taken aback, wondering what had happened. "Why is it so messy again?" A voice rang out. Jingjio landed on the sword. Zhao Leu looked at him in silence and suddenly asked, "Sword peak?" Jingjio didn't know why she asked this question, so he answered. Zhao Leu smiled when she was sure it was true. Her dimples reappeared. Gu Qing and Young Yuan landed on the peak top. Seeing the scene in front of him, Young Yuan was stunned, asking, "My master has dimples?" "Yes," Gu Qing said. "When my master arranged flowers for her at the plum meeting, at least hundreds of people saw it." Young Yuan said in surprise, "I haven't seen it even once." "Well, why did my master go back? Is she going to stay behind closed doors again as soon as senior master came back?" Jingjio didn't know why Zhao Leu suddenly turned around and went back to the manor cave. He didn't want to think about things he couldn't understand. Looking at the familiar scenery on the peak top and feeling the warm spring breeze, Jingjio thought this place was indeed more suitable for sleeping than the cold cave in the snow. At least the bamboo chair wouldn't be frozen too hard. He was inspired. That bamboo chair appeared by the cliff's edge, where it usually stayed. There were even 6 dents on the ground there. Jingjio lay down on the chair and uttered. Gu Qing knew that his master would make this sound when he was extremely comfortable, like a long sigh. Young Yuan suddenly yelled, "Master, you've come back." Zhao Leu walked out from the manor cave. Her hair was wet, the ends of which were dripping with water. She had also changed into a clean cloth. Gu Qing admired her, but he was also a bit worried. It wasn't like a girl to take a bath so quickly. Zhao Leu walked to the front of the bamboo chair, motioning for Jingjio to move his legs and sit down. Jingjio took out the wooden comb and started combing her hair. Chapter 226. Seeing this, Gu Qing and Young Yuan looked at each other, thinking that their worries were unnecessary. Jing Jiao didn't know what they were thinking about, saying, "Tell her." Gu Qing understood what he meant and told them about what had happened in the snowland, including how Jing Jiao was plotted against by Lo Huainan, how he suffered in the snow cave, what Jing Jiao told others after he got out of the snow cave, and Fong Jingtian's problem. He even told them about Tong Lu. But he didn't mention that Bai Zhao came to the courtyard of the Aoyama sect the day before yesterday. Zhao Lu didn't turn her head around, asking, "Why don't you tell them that what Lo Huainan said is false? Even if we don't care, Lu Shui will feel better. As long as Bai Zhao and I are still alive, Lo Huainan won't be sentenced to death. But it's not right for you to kill him, especially for Lu Shui." Jing Jiao said, "Another thing is that what Lu Shui is doing now might be more serious than what he has already done." Zhao Lei didn't say anything more, and Gu Qing was quite calm, but Young Yuan felt a bit uneasy. He looked at the clouds in the sky and the forest at the foot of the cliff for a while, and in the end he had no choice but to listen to the cries of the monkeys in the forest. The daily life on the peak top was cultivation, so chatting like today's was rare. The atmosphere of reunion was quite relaxed, but they didn't know what to say next since they weren't good at chatting, so there was an awkward silence in the room. Jing Jiao thought of something and took out the snow beetle, saying, "I brought it back from the snowland." The snow beetle was white all over, with bamboo-like limbs, ugly but clean. Regular people would be scared if they saw it. Zhao Leiyu and Gu Qing were curious about it, but Young Yuan yelled excitedly, "I've only seen some corpses in the snowland this time, but this is the first time I've seen a living one. It's the larva of the snow foot worm, but it was affected by something and mutated. Now, it's different from the other monsters of the snow country." Jing Jiao flipped his palm, and the snow beetle landed on the ground. It sensed the unfamiliarity of the environment and was very nervous. Instinctively, it turned over and revealed its abdomen to show its submission. Its 6 snowy, bamboo-like limbs were vibrating at high speed, producing a sound similar to that of a cicada. Interesting. Young Yuan held it in front of his eyes and observed it carefully. Gu Qing reminded, "Be careful, there might be cold poison." Young Yuan thought that he might be afraid of other poisons, but the cold poison was nothing to him. He looked at Jing Jiao and asked, "Senior uncle, what should we call it?" Jing Jiao had never thought about this question. In his opinion, this was just a bug, and there was no need for a special name. "Cold cicada," said Zhao Leiyu. Gu Qing thought that it was a good name, even though it didn't look like it. Young Yuan also thought it was a good name, but he was a bit upset when he thought of something else. He said to Zhao Leiyu, "Master, haven't you decided on a name for me yet?" Gu Qing said with a smile, "Your original name is not bad. Why do you insist on changing it?" Young Yuan said, "I always think that name is not appropriate." Jing Jiao thought that Catch the Tiger and Ride the Whale were indeed too offensive, so he said, "It's better to change it." Sitting on the bamboo chair, Zhao Leiyu looked at the sea of clouds over the cliff and felt the movement of the wooden comb. She was in a good mood, so good that she wanted to hum a song. She said casually, "Yuan Chu." Young Yuan thought that this name was too casual. Jing Jiao said, straight in a crooked way, "Not bad." Young Yuan was a bit shocked, thinking that senior uncle's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. He stood up and bowed to his master, thanking him for the name. From this day on, he had a new name, Yuan Chu. "Why is it red?" Gu Qing said, in surprise. Yuan Chu looked at the snow beetle named Cold Cicada in his hand and found that the edge of its carapace was indeed greenish-red, like a shrimp or crab thrown into boiling water. He was also surprised. "It's too hot here," said Jing Jiao. The gentle breeze was blowing on the peak top, so it couldn't be considered hot. Even if it was a bit hotter than the snowland, it shouldn't be cooked. Yuan Chu wondered what he should do, asking, "How should I feed it?" "There's an ice jade bed in the cave. Make a nest there," Zhao Leiyu instructed without turning her head around. "Gu Qing, tell the monkeys to stay away from it if they run into it, in case they are poisoned to death." Jing Jiao continued, "Go to Shuriwei Peak and ask for some ice essence. One bottle should last a month." Yuan Chu did some calculations, thinking that this cold cicada was indeed precious according to the method of feeding it. Gu Qing and Jing Jiao went to take care of these things, leaving Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei alone by the cliff's edge. "Why didn't you leave back then?" asked Zhao Lei. The story told by Gu Qing was still puzzling to her. Jing Jiao said, "The queen of the snowy kingdom sensed my presence and kept a close watch on me." Zhao Lei realized that was the reason, and said, "But you could have used the 10,000-mile seal to leave, and Lo Huainan would have left." "I can't rob a little girl of her belongings," said Jing Jiao. This was a good answer. Looking at the flowing clouds outside the cliff, Zhao Lei asked, "Why did you go with Bai Zhao to rescue Lo Huainan in the beginning?" She wasn't jealous. She was merely curious and inquisitive because she knew that Jing Jiao wasn't such a person. Most of all, this wasn't the Tao he was pursuing. Humans are social animals. They have a spiritual need and need to be needed. Jing Jiao said, "The cultivation practitioners are not humans, so they have to be free from this need." Zhao Lei understood that this was his Tao. Jing Jiao said, "The saving of the people that Lo Huainan, you and Guanan Shan and the others have been thinking about is a spiritual need. This is not a bad thing. When your Tao hearts can't be stabilized, it can be of great help. It's like a treasured ship sailing in a storm. It needs a rudder and a rock to keep it in check." Zhao Lei asked, "Why did you stay if you didn't need it?" Back to the original question. Jing Jiao said, "She intended to save me, so I should reciprocate her kindness, which is flawless." Zhao Lei asked, "Is this the cause and effect that the Guocheng temple talked about?" Jing Jiao said, "To pursue the great path, one must sever it cleanly." It was a very straightforward statement. Zhao Lei thought for a while and asked, "What about us?" Jing Jiao said, "I don't know. It's never happened before." Zhao Lei understood what he meant. The seniors and masters of the cultivation world would usually only accept disciples very late in life. Even the dual cultivation partners would only have children very late in life. The saying was very mysterious, but it all originated from this. To ascend and become an immortal, one should sever all ties with the mortal world. Jing Jiao put away the comb and looked at the black braid, revealing a satisfied smile. Zhao Lei turned around and looked into his eyes, asking, "Has this experience changed your mind?" "No," Jing Jiao said. Zhao Lei was silent for a while, then said, "I shouldn't have persuaded you to go." Jing Jiao stroked her head and said, "It was I who wanted to go." Zhao Lei asked, "Did you find that person?" Jing Jiao touched his ears and said, "No, but he should have been deceived by me." Zhao Lei's eyes fell on his ears. Jing Jiao had a pair of prominent ears. Chapter 227. "Why would he be deceived?" asked Zhao Lei. Jing Jiao said, "Because he is too suspicious." Thinking that his big brother would be deceived by him, Jing Jiao curled up the corners of his mouth, showing a contented smile. Zhao Lei was a bit surprised because Jing Jiao seldom had such an emotion. He didn't care about the inherited sword by the stream, the sword trial in Aoyama, and the plum meeting, no matter how impressive the event were. Zhao Lei didn't know what he wanted to deceive that person about, and Jing Jiao didn't know what was the point of it either. It was a habit of his for hundreds of years to keep some trump cards. He had learned this from his big brother. It was the same as when he knew there was a ghost in Aoyama, but he didn't expect it to be Fang Jingtian. So many years had passed, but he still hadn't forgotten his master. Zhao Lei asked, "Fang Jingtian tried to kill you twice because he suspected that you had found something?" Jing Jiao said, "Zui wanted to kill you on the Sword Peak because he knew through the curtain rollers that you were investigating Bihu Peak. Fang Jingtian didn't know what I had found, but he knew I was investigating. This reason was enough." Hearing this, Zhao Lei raised her ink-black eyebrows slightly, but didn't say anything. This was a serious matter. If she and Jing Jiao pushed those people too hard, they would strike like lightning. How could they deal with them? Shenma Peak seemed to be popular, but it was actually the weakest among the 9 peaks of Aoyama. Zhao Leiyu, who had the highest cultivation state, had just entered the free travel state. How could you be a match for those people? Jingjiu knew what she was worried about, just like what he had been worried about when they saw Insan's corpse. The years in the snowland didn't change his mind. He still thought it was safest to stay in Aoyama. Nobody could do anything here. The problem was that those 2 guys would leave Aoyama for a while after a few years. What if those ghosts hiding in the peaks took the opportunity to strike? One could never be too cautious in the face of death. Moreover, this was his Aoyama. It would be ridiculous if something happened here. He did not want to give the other party any chance, so he stood up and said, "Come with me to a place." Zhao Leiyu asked, "Where?" "Bihu Peak," answered Jingjiu. Zhao Leiyu's expression turned serious. Before Jingyang's ascension, 2 pieces of Thunder Soul wood from Bihu Peak had mysteriously disappeared. She wanted to investigate this matter a few years ago, but Jingjiu stopped her. "Today he brought me to Bihu Peak." Could it be that he was going to reveal the truth of this matter? The 9 peaks of Aoyama were different from each other. Shima Peak was the loneliest. It was similar to the Sword Peak, like a stone sword pointing to the sky. On the other hand, Bihu Peak was extremely green, looking like an artificial mountain in a garden. The dense forest was like moss covering all the mountain paths. Only by walking on it would one realize how huge Bihu Peak was. It was very difficult to meet anyone here. Chilly clouds and mist floated in the green forest. The mountain path ahead was faintly discernible. It really looked like a path leading to a fairyland, as if it could disappear at any time. When they came to the edge of cliff, Jingjiu looked at the peak in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "I dislike the cold more and more." Back when he was on that peak, he did not like the coldness coming from the bottom of the well. Even the boiling hot pot soup couldn't bring him much comfort. Now, after several years of living in the snowland, this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. There were many cliffs on that peak. Ice and snow remained on the cliffs, but the upper part was covered with green pines. The coldness could be felt even from such a long distance. That was the Shangda Peak. Zhao Lei's line of sight fell on that place. Jingjiu continued. That person used to be locked in the sword jail at the bottom of the Shangda Peak. By now, Zhao Lei knew why he stopped. Thinking of the story she was about to hear, she couldn't help but feel a bit solemn. The sword jail is the killing gate of the sword formation of Aoyama. The forbidding formation is so powerful that he couldn't leave no matter how hard he tried. Jingjiu's voice was emotionless. Until one year, he found a piece of Thunder Soul wood and decided to abandon his Taoist body and transfer his spiritual soul to a disciple of the underworld. Finally, he succeeded in escaping. At that time, the 9 peaks of Aoyama and even the whole of Chaotian focused their attention on the top of the Shima Peak. It was indeed the best opportunity. Thinking of the corpse outside Cloudy Town, Zhao Leiyu fell silent. Jingjiu continued, "Of course, it's not safe enough." So he faked his death and escaped with the help of Master Meng's sword, cutting off all the clues. Zhao Leiyu said, "It looks like the curtain rollers were right. Master Meng is indeed involved in this matter." Jingjiu said, "He might not know the whole inside story, but he must have something to do with it. That's why Shanghai Peak can find Bihu Peak." Zhao Leiyu asked confusedly, "But Master Meng has been trying to break through the state of free travel in Shangda Peak." Jingjiu said, "Staying behind closed doors is like being imprisoned." Zhao Leiyu understood. After a moment of silence, she said, "The former peak master of Bihu, Lei Poyan, was imprisoned because of this. Why did he escape later?" Jingjiu said, "He was of course released by someone." Zhao Leiyu asked, "Did his accomplices want to save him?" Jingjiu said, "Or they wanted to kill him, because Shangda Peak won't kill him." Looking at the cold peak in the distance, Zhao Leiyu said, "You want to find the Thunder Soul Wood because you want to find the person who escaped, not the ascension of Senior Grandmaster Jingyang?" Jingjiu said, "The Ascension formation doesn't need the Thunder Soul Wood." Zhao Leiyu stopped looking at Jingjiu and asked, "Then where is the other piece of Thunder Soul Wood?" Jingjiao said, "It has its uses." Zhao Liu fell silent again and then asked, "Then what are we doing here on Bihu Peak today?" Jingjiao said, "This is what you want to find, so I have to let you see it with your own eyes. And I'll take you to meet a guy." Having said that, Jingjiao continued walking, and Zhao Liu followed him. The mountain path became steeper. After a long time, the mist suddenly dispersed, and the wetness hit their faces. They could see the Taoist hall in front of the cliff in the distance. Zhao Liu knew that the blue lake was behind the cliff. "Who is it?" Along with the chilly sword wills, two disciples showed up and looked at them with vigilance. There is only one mountain path leading to the top of Shinma Peak, and there were no disciples guarding it. There were only forbidding formations. On Bihu Peak, there were at least a dozen mountain paths leading to the top. The forbidding formations were also set up in front of the cliff and guarded by disciples all day long. Before Jingjiao and Zhao Liu could say anything, the two disciples of Bihu Peak saw their faces. Their expressions changed slightly, and they saluted hastily. "Greetings, Peak Master, Senior Master Jing." The two disciples of Bihu Peak were surprised, wondering why these two masters had come and why they didn't ride their swords to the top of the peak. They greeted them respectfully and were about to inform their masters. "I haven't been back for a long time, so I want to take a stroll. You don't need to inform me, and you don't need to pay attention to me." Jingjiao and Zhao Liu continued walking forward. Soon, the two arrived at the top of the peak. In front of them was a blue lake like the sea, and white seagulls were flying in the sky. Chapter 228. In the Taoist hall in front of the cliff. The peak master of Bihu, Chun Yutian, and two elders were discussing something. They were startled when they heard the message from a disciple. "Stroll around," an elder said in a hoarse voice. "Do you think Bihu Peak is the backyard of Shinma Peak, and you can come and go as you please? This is too disrespectful." Cultivation in Aoyama was very diligent. Few disciples would go to other peaks for sightseeing unless they had something important to do, except for those girls on Qingrong Peak. Of course, one could go to other peaks if they wanted to, and nobody would stop them. However, Zhao Liu and Jingjiao were not regular disciples, and Zhao Liu was the peak master of Shinma Peak. It was a taboo for them to go to other peaks without informing anyone. Qin Yutian glanced at the elder and said in a mocking tone, "What do you want to say, big brother? Are you still in a bad mood? Because the precious tree house was taken by Shinma Peak." He had just entered the broken sea state from the free travel state 2 years ago, and he was the weakest in the 9 peaks of Aoyama, except for Zhao Liu. The two elders had been in the broken sea state many years ago, and their cultivation states were higher than his, but they didn't respond to his mockery. The other elder said with a bitter smile, "Losing the precious tree house has indeed affected the disciples' cultivation. Peak Master, please don't blame me for being angry. Bihu Peak is the most miserable one among the 9 peaks of Aoyama, but who is to blame? It's his fault for making a mistake he shouldn't have made." Chen Yutian said with a self-mocking smile, "I was appointed as a peak master when I was still in the free travel state. If such a ridiculous thing could happen, it means that the immortal sect master and the sword justice want us to shut up and behave. If you don't agree, you can go to the hermit peaks and ask a senior master to come out and fight a lawsuit with them." The elder said with a bitter smile, "Those senior masters have already become bones. Ask them to come out and worship them?" Chen Yutian said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's endure it for 100 years. I'll pretend I didn't see anything they did, not to mention that they just came here for sightseeing." The first elder said angrily, "How long do we have to endure it? The longer we endure, the weaker we become. If something happens, how are we going to hold on?" Chun Yutian sighed and said, "Serving the great ancestor is more important than anything else. As long as it's here, the immortal sect master has to show respect to Bihu Peak." There was a powerful forbidding formation on the top of Bihu Peak. The lake water looked beautiful, but there were many dangers hidden in it. Zhao Liu could guess where Jingjiao was taking her, but the palace on the island in the middle of the lake was a forbidden area in Aoyama. Even if she was the peak master of Aoyama, she could not enter without permission. She suddenly felt that Jingjiu had left. When she turned around, she found that he was still in the same place, but he was no longer breathing. The aura mentioned here was not just breathing, but also the relaxation of pores and the flow of blood. Jingjiu seemed to have turned into a lifeless stone. Zhao Lei knew that he had this ability, so she wasn't surprised. Back then, when Zui wanted to kill her on the sword's edge, he had silently appeared like this. But she didn't have this ability. How could she pass through this forbidding formation without alerting the people on Bihu Peak? Jingjiu handed her something. It was a small green bamboo board, about the size of a mahjong tile. It looked ordinary and didn't emit any aura. Miraculously, as she took the green bamboo board, the forbidding formation around the blue lake suddenly disappeared, or in other words, a passageway opened up in front of her. Zhao Lei thought of a possibility and asked in surprise, "Is this the token of the sect master?" Other than the token of the sect master, what else could disable the forbidding formation in Aoyama? "No," said Jingjiu. Zhao Lei turned over the small green bamboo board and found a picture of a golden pheasant on it. She asked curiously, "What is this?" "The demon pheasant," answered Jingjiu. Zhao Lei felt the name was familiar, as if she had heard it somewhere before. The sun was blazing in the sky, and there was no wind on the calm lake. The clear lake water suddenly arched up, overflowed the silver beach, and then retreated. Jingjiu and Zhao Lei walked out of the lake water, steam rising from their bodies. They dried their clothes after walking a few steps. The top of Bihu Peak was facing a spiritual eye of the great formation of Aoyama, where clouds and rain often gathered and thunder and lightning struck. It was rare to see such weather. The wildcats all came out from the woods and the palace, lying on the beach by the lake and basking in the sun. It was a magnificent scene. Jingjiu and Zhao Lei walked toward the hall. Those wildcats squinted their eyes and ignored them. Zhao Lei felt the pressure from the front and thought of the rumors, feeling nervous. The closer they got to the hall, the clearer the pressure became. But where did this pressure come from? Jingjiu walked to the stone steps in front of the hall and sat down. A white cat was lying on the stone steps, its messy long hair covered with dust. Zhao Lei wondered if it was her. Looking at the dirty hair of the white cat, she thought of her own hair in the past. She felt less nervous. She walked over and glanced at Jingjiu. Jingjiu signaled her not to be afraid and said to the white cat, "She is the current master of Shima Peak, called Zhao Lei." The white cat didn't open its eyes, still lying on the stone steps lazily. Jingjiu said to Zhao Lei, "The guardian of Aoyama, White Ghost. You can also call him Lueda." Zhao Lei thought it was true. She calmed down and saluted seriously. The guardian of Aoyama was much more senior than the immortal sect leader. It could be said that the guardian of Aoyama had never been in chaos. She just felt that the name of the guardian was too peasant. White Ghost opened his eyes and glanced at Zhao Lei, the expression in his eyes nonchalant and lazy. Suddenly, its eyes lit up, and it glanced at Jingjiu. "The successor you chose is a girl. Did you finally understand that ascension is boring, or the human world is more fun?" Jingjiu didn't know what it was thinking, and he said, "Take care of her from now on." The white ghost put its head back on its soft front paws and didn't want to talk to him. It thought again and again, "I'm not a babysitter." Jingjiu said, "I'm here for something." The white ghost thought it was all nonsense. "Otherwise, why would you come here?" Jingjiu said, "You sleep every day anyway. Do you want to sleep at my place?" The white ghost glanced at him. Not to mention the Thunder Soul wood, the Bihu Peak could gather thunder and make stars fall. "What would I eat if I went to your peak that has nothing? What would I drink? It won't take too long. 3 years at least, 5 years at most. If you want, I can return half of the precious tree house to Bihu Peak." Jingjiu said, "Bihu Peak has served you for so many years. I guess you can't bear to see them suffer." The white ghost narrowed its eyes, thinking about something. Jingjiu's hand fell on its body. The white ghost's pupils shrank like needles, and its hair stood up like needles. Feeling the horrible pressure from it, Zhao Liu was very nervous. Jing Jiu's expression didn't change. He stroked it. The white ghost closed its eyes and accepted its fate again. Jing Jiu's hand fell on its neck. He suddenly grabbed it and lifted it up. The white ghost suddenly opened its eyes. It couldn't bear it anymore. It meowed and was ready to attack. All of a sudden, it found itself in a warm place. It was in Zhao Liu's arms. The white ghost hesitated for a while. It rubbed its face and stepped on it with its front paws. It felt good and soft. Chapter 229. Holding white ghost in her arms, Zhao Liu followed Jing Jiu into the grand hall. It was spacious inside the grand hall. The floor was made of green jade, carved with complicated patterns by some unknown method, glowing and exuding a faint energy of the formation. Outside the greenstone formation, there was a row of platforms as high as half a man, also made of green jade, with all kinds of jade bottles placed on the platforms. Zhao Liu guessed that these jade bottles should contain the materials that needed to be nurtured by the power of thunder, and they would be sent to Shuriweb Peak after a while to be made into various magic pills. Normally, she would check the labels on the jade bottles like Jingjiu did, but now she focused all her attention on her own chest. In the words she had told Jingjiu, she was very fierce, and everybody knew that she was very bold. But she felt very uneasy at the moment. The white cat in her arms didn't move, but she felt like she was holding a large mountain or a puff of smoke. To put it more accurately, she felt like she was holding the memorial tablet of the Grandmasters of Aoyama. Her arms were stiff, and her steps were heavy. She asked Jingjiu, "What are we doing here?" White Ghost opened his eyes and glanced at her, thinking that the Aoyama sect was getting worse with each generation. They looked good, but how could they be so stupid? Since they're going to take it away, we have to take the Thunder Soul Wood with us. Having said that, Jingjiu walked toward the center of the greenstone ground. The greenstone formation sensed something and started rotating automatically. The ground bulged up slightly, and a stone platform rose up. A few ceramic plates were placed on the stone platform, and on the plates were some blackened objects. Judging from the vaguely discernible texture of the objects, they should be wood. These were the precious treasures of Aoyama, the Thunder Soul Wood. The Thunder Soul Wood was the heart of an ancient tree that had sunk in the depths of the giant whirlpool. It had been soaked in seawater for innumerable years and washed by the pressure of the giant whirlpool for innumerable years. Then, it was retrieved by the strong practitioners of the reaching heaven state of the Aoyama sect. Then, it was placed on the top of Bihu Peak to withstand the power of thunder and lightning. It took 500 years for it to mature and become the legendary Thunder Soul Wood. The Aoyama sect had been established for 10,000 years, and the number of Thunder Soul Woods was extremely limited. Some of them were scattered, and 2 of them were taken away a few years ago. Now, there were only 6 pieces left, and 1 of them had not matured yet, so it needed to be left here to withstand the lightning strikes. Jingjiu put away the 5 pieces of Thunder Soul Wood and turned around to look at Zhao Liu. He noticed that the way she hugged the cat was very stiff, as if she was facing a great enemy. He couldn't help but laugh and say, "Relax a bit, you can touch it. It likes it like this." Zhao Liu said nervously, "I've never had a cat before. I don't know how to pet it." Jingjiu said, "Just like how I touched your head." Zhao Liu was taken aback for a moment, recalling the feeling she usually had. She put her hand on the white ghost gingerly and started to stroke it. Along with her movement, the white ghost's eyes gradually narrowed, and it let out a deep snoring sound. Zhao Liu felt a bit uneasy, asking Jingjiu with her eyes if it was a sign that the white ghost was about to get angry. Jingjiu said, "It's very comfortable." After receiving the report from his disciple, Chen Yutian knew that Jingjiu and Zhao Liu had already left by riding the sword, so he asked, "What did they do?" The disciple said shamefully, "I didn't follow them. I don't know where they went later." Chen Yutian asked with furrowed brows, "Did anything change in the peak?" The disciple shook his head and said, "Nothing." Chen Yutian felt it strange, thinking that one had just come back from the snowland, and the other had just entered the state of free travel. What were they going to do by coming to Bihu Peak at this time? Even if they thought the scenery here was beautiful, why were they in such a hurry? He couldn't figure it out, and he felt frustrated, as if he had missed something. The thoughtless sword landed on the peak top, dimming the dusk. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu looked at the white cat in Zhao Liu's arms in surprise, wondering where the two masters had brought this pet here. There were countless rare birds and animals in the peaks of Aoyama, but cats and dogs, which were commonly seen in the mortal world, were rarely seen. Yuan Chu approached curiously. Seeing that the white cat had its eyes closed and looked very obedient, he reached out his hand to pet it. Jingjiu glanced at him. Yuan Chu felt as if the back of his hand had been pricked by a needle, so he drew his hand back hastily, but he misunderstood. Gu Qing found the problem, because Zhao Liu was holding the cat in a very stiff posture, and she looked a bit nervous, as if she were facing a formidable enemy. If it were an ordinary house cat, how could she show such an expression? Zhao Liu walked into the manor cave with the cat in her arms. Gu Qing asked anxiously, "Master, what is this?" Jingjiu said, "Don't tell anyone else." Yuan Chu realized that there was something wrong with the white cat's background, so he agreed immediately. Jingjiu told him the true identity of the white cat. Gu Qing was so shocked that he couldn't speak, and Yuan Chu covered his mouth tightly with his hands to prevent himself from screaming. The two masters had brought the principal Gar back. If the masters of the peaks of Aoyama knew about this, there would be a lot of trouble. Gu Qing suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. He ran into the manor cave in a hurry. Yuan Chu also thought of something, so he shouted and ran into the manor cave. The bloody scene they were worried about didn't appear in the depths of the manor cave, but the current scene was a bit weird. Zhao Liu stood by the bed, her eyes wide open. The white cat was lying on the bed, sleeping soundly with its eyes closed. That snow beetle, named Cold Cicada, was lying on its head for some reason. Sensei was trembling, and she was so terrified that she was about to pass out. Cold Cicada didn't dare to grab the cat's hair, so it slid down like a stone after a while. The white cat picked it up with its furry paw and put it back on its head, without even opening its eyes. What did it mean? Was it going to use this little monster of the snowy kingdom as a bow? Will the principal guard feel cold sleeping on the cold jade bed? It should be fine if it's cold, but it's a bit hard. Yeah, should we go and make a nest? What does the principal guard eat? Yuan Chu was still in shock, his voice trembling. Even Gu Qing was in a trance. They had heard of the principal guard of Aoyama, but they had never thought they could see the legendary divine beast guarding the mountains, and it seemed that they would live together in the future. Not to mention that the most mysterious and dreadful white ghost was actually a cat. It was beyond their imagination. Gu Qing asked doubtfully, "Master, are you sure?" "That's right," said Jingjiu. "You can call him Lu Ada." Gu Qing and Yuan Chu eyed each other, as they thought that they didn't dare call the principal guard so. Also, where did Lu Ada's rustic name come from? The Master White Ghost is not a ghost, but a cat. Is the Master Dark Phoenix not a phoenix? Yuan Chu asked reflexively. "It's a chicken," said Jingjiu. Hearing this name, Zhao Liu thought of the small green bamboo board, her expression changing slightly, wondering if you call it the devil chicken. Yuan Chu found it hard to believe and couldn't speak for a long time. Gu Qing asked, "Does the Master Round Turtle have another true form?" Chapter 230. I had written that there were 2 in the heavenly arrival state and 10 in the broken sea state in Aoyama, but I forgot about it later. I always thought that more people in the broken sea state would be more convenient to fight with others. Yesterday, 3 swordsmen in the broken sea state appeared on Bihu Peak, which is a bit inappropriate. I'll think about it more. Besides, I like the dead dog very much. The cultivation sects with a long history and profound resources in Chaotian usually had their own divine guardian animals, like the white snake of Ozawa and the cold signal bird of Kunlun. Even the Western Sea Sword School, which had less profound resources, had a flying whale that looked like a mountain in the ocean. The mythical beast of Zhongzhou School, the Qilin, had long become the main character of many myths. However, the other main character, the Azure Dragon, had disappeared for many years. Of course, the Aoyama sect also had its own guardian beasts, which were the legendary Four Guardians. However, the guardians of Aoyama were rather mysterious. The cultivation practitioners only knew that they had the titles of the Round Turtle, the White Ghost, the Dark Phoenix, and the Night Screamer, but they had no idea what their true appearances were. It wasn't until today that Yuan Chu learned that the White Ghost, the principal guard of their sect, was a cat, the Dark Phoenix was a chicken, and the Round Turtle was indeed an old turtle. Not to mention, compared to Qilin, even if it was compared to other sects mountain guarding divine beasts, it was still too shabby. Yuan Chu really wanted to forget about these things and only remember those unparalleled and domineering titles. What about the other one? Gu Qing asked curiously. Lord Night Howler. Lord Night Howler. Although it's not an ordinary. Okay, it's a dog. Yuan Chu thought for a long time about how he should describe it. In the end, he realized that the truth could not be changed, so he could only give up and glare at him. Gu Qing felt very innocent. He thought to himself, I don't know. Ada doesn't like the dead dog. Don't mention this name in front of him, said Jing Jiao. The Round Tortoise, the White Ghost, the Dark Phoenix, and the Night Screamer were all beautiful titles, but Jing Jiao was still used to calling them the way he used to, like Ada and the dead dog. After saying this, he turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff, lying down on the bamboo chair. Zhao Liu followed him. Gu Qing thought the name Dead Dog was really weird, and why did his master seem a bit down when he mentioned this principal guard? He asked Yuan Chu. Lord Night Howler was at Shangda Peak. Yuan Chu was somewhat surprised and asked, How did you know? Gu Qing thought to himself, Out of the four guardians of Aoyama, you only know Lord Night Howler. Isn't it obvious? The day was short, but today was long. The sword boat landed by the stream, and a gust of wind rose on the peak. They went to Bihu Peak, enjoyed the scenery of the two peaks, and brought back a cat. The sun hadn't completely set yet. Jingjiu lay down on the bamboo chair. A porcelain plate appeared under his hand. There seemed to be a lot of sand in the plate. Looking at this scene, Zhao Liu thought to herself that her 6 years in the snowland were really tough. Tingguang Peak was the highest peak, so the setting sun could be seen. As the setting sun went lower, the shadow of the sheath of the inherited heaven sword on the stone monument grew shorter and shorter until it became a black dot. The stone turtle under the stone monument had its eyes closed, and it was unclear when it would open them again. Shilai Peak and Shuriwet Peak were the two peaks closest to each other among the 9 peaks. They weren't very high, and the mountains had become dark and gloomy. Nobody knew that there was a steep stone bridge connecting the two peaks between the cliffs and shrouded in the thick fog. The stone bridge was hidden in the thick fog all year round, and the frost and snow never dissipated. When the wind blew over once in a while, one could vaguely see the paw prints like bamboo, leaves scattered on the bridge. The location of Shangda Peak was rather peculiar. It was located among the peaks of Aoyama, where the spiritual sources converged, but it was far away from any spiritual source. Perhaps it was for this reason that the cold well at the bottom of the ground couldn't get any spiritual energy, and the deeper one went, the colder it got. The deepest part of the well was the killing gate of the great formation of Aoyama, which was even colder than the snowland. There was no sunlight here all year round, as if it was a world of perpetual darkness. The stone passage was damp, and the cells exuded an extremely filthy and evil energy, as if it were real. Even though they were separated by the thick and heavy stone door, they could still hear the angry screams and vicious curses of the underworld devil men and demons inside. There were no disciples of Aoyama guarding this place. Even the elders in the Broken Sea State would be contaminated by the filthy energy and the demonic thoughts if they stayed here for too long. Their cultivation would be affected easily, and they might even be possessed by the devil. The main method of guarding the sword jail in Shangda Peak was to patrol with the flying swords. But how would they deal with the affairs during normal times? A faint sound burst out in the pitch-black passage, like the snowflakes falling on the ground. A faint light came from nowhere, and a black paw landed on the wet stone floor. It was a black dog with 4 thin and long limbs, a pure black body, and a glossy fur. When the light fell on its body, It seemed to be swallowed up instantly. The most terrifying part was that its body was enormous, like a black mountain. The passage in the sword jail that was dozens of feet high was like the most common dog hole for it. Its movements were very gentle, giving people a feeling that the sound of the falling snowflakes was made on purpose. Otherwise, it would have been absolutely silent. The prohibition and the stone door that separated the sword jail kept opening in front of it. It walked slowly in the passage, its eyes cold and gloomy, as if it was patrolling its own territory. The screams and vicious curses in the sword jail suddenly disappeared. Even the evil and filthy aura had disappeared. The whole sword jail became unusually quiet and clean. Regardless of whether the prisoners in the cells were traitors in the Broken Sea state or swordsmen of the underworld who were as powerful as the demon god, they all showed great fear. The black dog kept walking forward until it walked out of the sword jail. Outside the cave was a thick fog, full of endless murderous intent. Outside the fog was a sea of clouds. The sea of clouds seemed to be burning under the last ray of twilight. Countless mountain peaks were hidden in the burning clouds. This was the hermit peaks of Aoyama. The black dog started running at an unimaginably fast speed that even the flying sword couldn't match. The sea of clouds was disturbed, and the fog hung on its body like cotton. It was a marvelous scene. When it came to the front of a mountain peak, it stepped on the clouds and leaped a few thousand feet silently. There was a manor cave among the peaks, covered with leaves and dust outside. A gem was inlaid on the stone wall, glowing with a red light. The black dog looked at the tightly shut stone door in silence. It remembered clearly that the disciple in the manor cave came from Bihu Peak. 300 years ago, this disciple had reached the middle state of the Broken Sea state. He wanted to break through to the heavenly arrival state, but he couldn't see any hope, so he came to the Hermit Peaks. The prohibition was opened. The black dog walked into the manor cave and saw the dead body of the disciple. The face of the disciple was full of wrinkles, and he looked very old. His white hair was loose, and his skin was dry, devoid of any moisture. The black dog had seen such a scene many times, but its eyes were still cold and gloomy, devoid of any sadness. It lowered its head and bit the corpse, then turned around and left the manor cave. The gem on the stone wall turned green. The black dog leaped up and landed on the sea of clouds, then stepped on the clouds and left. The sun set, and the world returned to darkness. The black dog came to a stone mountain. There were many caves among the cliffs. There was a stone statue in each cave. The black dog lowered its head and put the corpse in its mouth into one of the caves. There was another stone statue. The black dog returned to the sword jail. It walked through the dark passage and arrived at a place. The surrounding walls formed a circle, which looked like a well, but the ground was very dry. The black dog sat down in silence. Chapter 231. The main theme of the cultivation world was not the struggle for power, nor was it the struggle for supremacy. Instead, it was cultivation. It was more obvious in the Aoyama sect. It was even more so in the Shima Peak. The four of them, who were not good at chatting, spent most of their time on cultivation every day. In the beginning, Gu Qing and Yuan Chu felt a bit uneasy because they had to guard the master white ghost. But as time elapsed, they had gradually gotten used to his presence and started to focus on their cultivation. Since White Ghost spent most of his time sleeping, it was not difficult for them to get used to it. It was quiet on the peak top from early morning to dusk. Zhao Leiyu, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu meditated and practiced sword work in their usual places. Occasionally, the sounds of flying swords breaking through the air and the cries of apes could be heard. Jing Jiu had been trapped in the snowland for 6 years, and his cultivation state had stagnated. But he was not in a hurry after he started cultivation again. He absorbed the energy of heaven and earth at an unimaginably fast speed, as if the energy of heaven and earth were pouring into his body. Every time he meditated, the energy of heaven and earth gathered on the top of Shima Peak would be more abundant and pure. A few days later, White Ghost came out of the cave after noticing his unusual cultivation. He could enjoy the benefits of the energy of heaven and earth on the top of Shima Peak, but the closer he was to Jingjiu, the better. White Ghost thought so. From that day on, whenever Jingjiu began to meditate and absorb the energy of heaven and earth, White Ghost would jump onto his head and lie on it. And Cold Cicada would lie on its head. It was quite a funny scene, but nobody saw it. A cat and a bug were not that heavy, so Jingjiu didn't care. White Ghost was dissatisfied, thinking that Jingjiu was too lazy and that he meditated too little every day. Fortunately, in addition to this, it also discovered another benefit. The sun on Shima Peak was rounder and bigger than the sun on Bihu Peak. The sunlight here was warmer, smelled better, and was more comfortable to bask in. Oh, there was another benefit. One day, after finishing his cultivation, White Ghost jumped into Zhao Lei's arms and asked her to hug him to sleep. Yuan Chu looked at this scene and asked in puzzlement, "Although I've heard that cats like to sleep, they usually go out to play at night. Why doesn't the Lord Guardian have such thoughts? I haven't gone anywhere since I came to Shima Peak." Jingjiu thought to himself, no matter how big the Aoyama was, no matter how beautiful the scenery was, it would eventually be finished after a few thousand years. What else could interest it? Back then, he was so bored that he went to the Hermit Peaks to dig the graves to see what treasures there were. He made a mess there, which made his big brother angry. His big brother and the dead dog taught him a good lesson. It was then that he disliked the dead dog. What about the dead dog? The relationship between it and Senior Brother was very good at that time. Did it continue to this day? After Senior Brother was imprisoned in the sword jail, how would it feel when it walked in the dark tunnel? There were many things that couldn't be figured out. Even the flowers would wither when they thought about it. It often rained in Aoyama during the midsummer, and the rain was heavier at night. One night, it rained heavily on the top of Bihu Peak. The dark clouds rolled up and down, and countless bolts of thunder and lightning struck down on the small island in the middle of the lake. After making sure that the pieces of Thunder Soul Wood were safe, Jingjiu turned around and walked out of the manor cave. He came to the eaves and stood by Zhao Leiyu. The night sky above Bihu Peak was torn into countless pieces by the lightning. Dozens of sword lights suddenly appeared in the sky, traveling at a high speed at a great risk. They were the disciples of Aoyama in the undefeated state and the free travel state, who were washing their swords with the help of the thunderstorms. The drizzle on the top of Shima Peak suddenly dispersed. Yuan Chu, who had sat by the cliff's edge with crossed legs for 5 days and 5 nights, opened his eyes and leapt up by stepping on his sword. A moment ago, he had broken through the state and entered the undefeated state. Guqing leapt up by riding his sword, following behind Jingjiu. Soon, the 2 sword lights entered the dozens of sword lights and couldn't be distinguished anymore. There was no empty space by the cliff's edge. White Ghost stared in the direction of Bihu Peak. No matter how dazzling the lightning was, his pupils didn't show any change. They were still as gloomy and deep as the starry sky. It was his job to protect the Thunder Soul Wood. Aoyama provided for him, so he had to do it well. It was similar to what Dead Dog did in the dark and gloomy underground. Not all the great grandmasters of Aoyama were as lazy and heartless as Jingjiu. In the rainstorm, White Ghost looked at the distance in silence. Cold Cicada crouched by his side. There was nothing new about cultivation. So was the change of the 4 seasons. 1 year had passed in the blink of an eye. Aoyama welcomed another winter. The people in the mountains didn't know the coldness and hardships outside, but they knew the beauty of the snowy scenery. It was still the request of Qingrong Peak. On the day when the first winter snow fell, a gap was opened in the great formation of Aoyama. The snowflakes fell down. After one night, Shangda Peak became whiter, and the peaks of other peaks were covered with a thick layer of snow. Only Bihu Peak looked like it was wearing a hat, and the color was not so good. Guqing pushed open the door of the wooden house and took a bite of the fruit thrown by the monkeys. As he was about to clean his face with the sword fire, he changed his mind when he saw the whiteness in front of his eyes. He felt more energetic after wiping his face with the snow. He walked to the peak top, put the stove in the stove, and started boiling the snow to make tea. The sound of boiling water came out from the iron kettle. Yuan Chu walked out from the manor cave while rubbing his eyes. Seeing the scene, he asked in surprise, "Big brother, are you going to make tea today?" Gu Qing said with a smile, "Yeah, it's rare to see snow today." As Yuan Chu walked to the cliff's edge, he suddenly saw a bulge in the snow. After taking a closer look, he found a tail sticking out of the snow. After some thought, he asked, "Should I wake up the Master Principal Guard and have some tea?" Gu Qing thought that the Master Principal Guard was still a cat, even though he was not a regular cat. Besides, a cat named Lu Ada would rather drink the rice wine than the tea brewed by the first snow. Though they had known each other for more than a year, Gu Qing was still not used to the name of the cat. He suddenly thought of something and asked, "Is the Master White Ghost the number one among the principal guards of Aoyama?" "Why do you think so?" asked Yuan Chu. Gu Qing mouthed the name Lu Ada soundlessly. Yuan Chu understood what he meant, thinking that it couldn't be. The voice of Jing Jiao came from above the manor cave. The round turtle, the devil rooster, and Ada. They all have the word Ada in their names because they all want to be the boss. It had snowed the previous night, so Jing Jiao moved back to the hall and placed a bamboo chair by the window, then opened the window all night. The tail in the snow, which looked like a flagpole, moved a little as if it was agreeing. Gu Qing looked up at the window and asked, "What about the Master Night Howler?" "Dead Dog thinks the three of them are all idiots," said Jing Jiao. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu wanted to laugh out, but they didn't dare to do so when they saw the white tail in the snow. All of a sudden, a whistling sound broke out. Zhao Leu walked to the cliff's edge and dismantled the forbidding formation. She reached out her hand and received a sword letter that had arrived through the air. She opened the sword letter and glanced at it, then said to the second floor, "The Western Sea Sword School has come to visit. Someone wants to challenge you." "Who is it?" asked Jing Jiao. "Tong Lu, that idiot," replied Zhao Lei. Chapter 232. At the foot of Shuriwe Peak, in front of the Grand Hall, countless pine trees were planted around the stone platform. As the winter wind blew over, the accumulated snow on the trees rustled, as if it was snowing again. The snow on the stone platform had been swept to one side by the caretakers, melting gradually under the sunlight, but the temperature in the hall dropped even lower. The expression in Tong Lu's eyes was cold, as he looked at the disciples of Aoyama in front of him and said, "Jing Jiao doesn't dare accept the challenge. This isn't the style of your Aoyama sword sect." The purpose of the visit of the Western Sea Sword School was to invite some influential figures of the Aoyama sect to participate in the Four Seas banquet that was to be held in a few days. The elders of the Western Sea Sword School would negotiate with the masters of Shuriwe Peak. Tong Lu formally issued the challenge, which was rejected by Shinma Peak as expected. "If cultivationist Tong Lu really wants to have a duel, I'd like to give it a try," said Yao Songzhan. "Or you can pick any one of us." Tong Lu said, "You're not my equal, and neither are you. There's no need to do this." In the past, it would have been Guanan Shan or Gu Han, who were the top-ranking disciples of Liang Wang Peak, who were responsible for receiving Tong Lu. However, they had been punished by the sect rules for a certain matter and hadn't left the manor cave for 2 years. Tong Lu vaguely guessed that the matter was the death of Lo Huainan. Yao Songzhan was ranked 11th on Liang Wang Peak, so he knew that he was indeed not Tong Lu's equal, so he wasn't angry when he heard what Tong Lu said. "In my opinion, cultivationist Tong is also not my young senior master's equal. There's no need to do this." Tong Lu didn't want to argue with him, so he turned around and walked toward the Grand Hall. What could he do if Jing Jiao didn't want to accept the challenge? Looking at Tong Lu's back, Yao Songzhan shook his head and said, "He thinks Senior Master Jing will accept his challenge. He's delusional." "It's more than delusional. He's an idiot." "That's right. Young Senior Master is such a lazy person. He won't waste his time on such matters. When has he ever had a sword duel with anyone?" Any disciple of Aoyama who didn't accept Tong Lu's challenge would be regarded as a coward and looked down upon by his peers. However, that person was Jing Jiao, so he wouldn't be despised. It was because all the disciples of the Green Mountain knew that Jing Jiao wasn't that kind of person. A disciple suddenly thought of something, saying, "Yes." Young senior master fought 3 rounds in a row at the sword trial of Green Mountain. It was because of Lu Shaff, of Lu of a sure sway. The crowd dispersed. Of the sea of the huge shadow seemed to be moving slowly on the surface of the sea, but it was actually moving at an astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, it had crossed the great chaotic reef and hundreds of ships and arrived outside Haijo City. Of the of Een of Zhou of the peak of the city. Of peak of the sea of. The heavenly whale flapped its wings and flew away from the city. Large waves rose on the surface of the sea, crashing against the cliff rocks and making booming sounds, but it couldn't drown out the cheers of the populace in the city. The Four Seas banquet of this year had officially begun. As a product of the competition with Zhaoga City, the Western Sea Sword School had increased its investment in the Four Seas banquet. Though it was still far from the plum meeting, it had improved greatly in both scale and level. More and more cultivation practitioners took part in the banquet. In the last 3 years, all the elders of Zhongzhou School were in the Yuanying state. But the Aoyama sect still sent a few disciples to participate in the banquet as they had done in the past, showing their attitude clearly. It was interesting that the Four Seas banquet's current reputation was largely due to the Aoyama sect. Zhao Leiyu and Jingjiu made their first appearance in the cultivation circle here. It was here that Jingjiu won first place in the chess tournament. It was also here that he participated in the plum meeting and played that shocking chess game with Tong Yin. Zhao Leiyu didn't participate in the Four Seas banquet, but the way she made her appearance was even more impressive. In the grand hall of the cloud platform, she killed the free-traveling practitioner Zhu Jie with a flash of blood-red light in front of the elders of the Western Sea Sword School and the highly achieved swordsmen of various sections. Countless palaces were hidden in the thick clouds over the ocean all year round, and that was the cloud platform. Standing by the edge of the grand hall, Tong Lu looked at the distant ground and thought of all this, his face looking terrible. The cloud platform was an important place of the Western Sea Sword School, responsible for communicating with Chao Tian. Though he was the personal disciple of the godly swordsman of West Ocean, he seldom came here. The Western Sea Sword School was located on a large island 2,000 miles deep in the ocean. That was the place where he practiced his sword work diligently. In his eyes at the moment, the blue bay looked like a precious gem, and the buildings in Aoyama looked like tiny dots. The results of this year's Four Seas banquet had already been announced. Later, the winners would come here by the cloud boat to receive the 4 precious treasures presented by Shiwang Sunday. As the representative of the young disciples of the Western Sea Sword School, he was responsible for receiving the important guests. Thinking of the boring pleasantries and the boring affairs, his face grew even more terrible. Lately, the Western Sea Sword School and the sects close to them had taken the opportunity of the Four Seas banquet to spread the news that he challenged Jingjiu in Aoyama, and that Jingjiu didn't dare accept the challenge. He was quite famous at the moment, but it was meaningless. It would be some time before the Four Seas banquet was over. Tong Lu walked back to his room and found a letter on the table. Who could come and go as he pleased in the important place of the Western Sea Sword School. He examined the letter with the piercing discernment, making sure that no formation or poison was attached to it. He picked it up and tore it open. 2 simple messages were written on the letter, the time and the place, which represented the challenge. What surprised him was that the signature was a red sword. A thoughtless sword? More than 10 days later, on the ocean outside of Haijo City, far from the coast, there was a large area of disordered reefs poking out of the water. The seawater was rolling and rolling among them, turning into countless white scales. When the waves were at their highest, the seawater would gush out from the reefs, looking like a whale spurting water. It was quite a spectacular scene. The mist all over the sky obscured the view, making it difficult to see anything from distance. A man in black stood among the reefs in silence, as if he wanted to merge with the reefs. If one didn't observe carefully, it would be hard to notice his existence. A sword light fell, and Tong Lu showed up. The The man in black looked at him and said, I didn't expect you to be so proud that you came alone. Aren't you worried that this is a trap to assassinate you? Tong Lu said, This is the Western Sea. Nobody can set up a trap to assassinate me here. The man in black asked, Perhaps it's because you know who the assassins are? Tong Lu said, I'm more curious about who would dare pretend to be a disciple of Aoyama. The man in black said, It's true that I'm no longer a disciple of Aoyama, but I'm not pretending to be one. Tong Lu guessed who the man in black was. After a moment of silence, he said, Just state your identity. I heard that you want to avenge Lo Huainan, and that's why you went to Aoyama to challenge Jingjiao. The man in black took off the black cloth covering his face, revealing a face that was even darker than before, though the expression on his face was as sincere as ever. Chapter 233. Tong Lu said nothing, his expression indifferent. Suddenly, there was a flash of sword light. The flying sword flew back from the distant reef. It was stained with water, but there was no blood. Lu Shui, who had been standing on the reef, had already disappeared. Tong Lu silently circulated his sword technique. The air in front of him slightly warped, and the white foam under his feet suddenly disappeared along with him. With a soft swish, a deep mark appeared on the reef where he had been standing. The dark blue seawater surged through the reef, the waves roiling. Pillars of water would occasionally spray out from the cracks in the reef, giving off a heavy stench of blood. Tong Lu and Lu Shui were hiding somewhere, ready to wield their swords again. At their current cultivation level, it was very difficult to see each other's flying swords with the naked eye. Naturally, the battle had become even more dangerous, often just a single sword strike away. During the sword trial in Aoyama, the sword duels between the disciples of the various peaks had been so spectacular and incessant pursuit. That was because the two sides understood each other too well, and it was not a battle of life and death. Tong Lu and Lu Shui's battle today was a battle of life and death. If their previous attacks had not missed, the white foam on the reef would have been dyed red by now. Time slowly passed. The seawater rumbled against the reef, but the figures of the two still did not appear. As sword cultivators, the first thing they had to do was to hide their tracks, just like how Zhao Liu had killed Lo Huainan. Beneath a certain reef, the light was so dim that it was difficult to see anything. The walls were covered in moss and corpses of seashells. Tong Lu stood there with his eyes closed, allowing the seawater to fall on his face and body. He did not react at all, his breathing so slow that it seemed like it would stop at any moment. His flying sword was of extremely high spiritual grade. It was called West Cold. At this moment, it was hidden in the snow-like waves, ready to attack at any moment. Several hundred zhang away, behind another reef, Lu Shui was sitting cross-legged in the sea with his eyes closed. The top of his head was several feet above the surface of the sea. His sword was nowhere to be seen. Amidst the rumbling of the waves, it was very difficult for them to capture each other's heartbeat and aura to determine each other's position. They could only spread out their sword awareness to search, but it was also easy for the other to determine their position. Thus, in the end, it still depended on whose sword was faster. Tong Lu suddenly felt a sense of danger. He opened his eyes and dodged to the side. With a crack, a bloody wound appeared on his left shoulder. A crack appeared on the reef, and the moss and shell corpses flew into the air before falling into the sea. Lu Shui's sword had been hidden in the sea all along. Tong Lu didn't expect this abandoned disciple of Aoyama to be so treacherous, but he wasn't afraid at all. He quickly circulated his sword source and pointed two of his fingers at a spot in the sea. The western coldness sword pierced through the air, and a white line appeared on the surface of the sea. The waves surged, and the momentum was extremely shocking. The Western Sea Sword School's hidden tide sword style. The sword light flashed. Dozens of white turbulence appeared on the surface of the sea. The reef was cut into pieces and then flew up like a downpour. Tong Lu drifted back 100 zhang, staring at the figure in the distance, and shouted sternly, "Where did you learn this sword technique?" He had previously ascertained Lu Shisui's position and used the most powerful move of the hidden tide sword style without hesitation. He didn't expect his opponent to be prepared and be able to predict the path of his sword, easily blocking it. Lu Shisui's whole body was drenched, and his face was pale. Zhen Yuan must have expended a lot of energy, and he looked like a water ghost that had crawled out of the sea. Several crisp sword chimes sounded around him, and several air currents appeared in the foggy air. These air currents were the marks left by the collision of the two flying swords. He didn't answer Tong Lu's question. He punched from a distance of 300 zhong, and his fist was surrounded by black demon fire. Regardless of whether it was the seawater or the waves beneath the reef, they were all evaporated in an instant, forming a white dragon that charged toward Tong Lu's body. Tong Lu knew this was the evil technique of the Blood Demon Church, as well as the power of the Demon Core's fire. His expression turned cold, and he called back the Western Coldness Sword. He laid down 3 sword curtains in front of him. With 3 soft sounds, the 3 sword curtains were broken. Tong Lu let out a muffled groan and fell heavily on the reef. His chest caved in, and blood seeped out from the corners of his mouth. He was severely wounded. Lu Shisui's face grew even paler. Such a violent strike had consumed too much of the demon fire and Zhen Yuan. He was about to pursue Tong Lu when he suddenly felt something was amiss. He took a glance at the horizon and then rode his sword away without hesitation. The black demon fire surged in all directions, the seawater boiled, and the white fog was like clouds. After the fog dissipated, Tong Lu's figure could no longer be seen. Several sword lights fell on the chaotic reef. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School had arrived. They were led by an elder in the free travel state. Seeing Tong Lu on the reef, a few disciples exclaimed in surprise and hurried over to help him. The elder in the free travel state sensed the remaining aura of the demon fire in the air and asked with a slight frown, "Who is it?" Tong Lu was helped up by a few disciples of the Western Sea Sword School, who said, "It's Lu Shisui." Upon hearing this name, both the elder and the disciples were astonished. Tong Lu gestured to his junior brother that he didn't need to be helped up. Looking around at the broken reef and the floating dead fish, a fierce glint flashed in his eyes. He won't be able to escape this time. From the moment he saw the letter, he had begun to guess who wanted to challenge him. Although he didn't expect Lu Shisui to be so daring, the answer wasn't beyond his expectations. This place was outside of Haizhou City, the territory of the Western Sea Sword School. He had made arrangements in advance, so he naturally wouldn't let Lu Shisui escape. But what happened next was beyond Tong Lu's expectations. The Western Sea Sword School sealed off the surroundings of Haizhou City and sent out many disciples to search for Lu Shisui, but they still couldn't find any trace of him. He was like a ghost that had vanished into thin air. Outside Haizhou City, there was a cloud that didn't disperse all year round. To be more precise, it was a massive cloud. Because this massive cloud was very thick, it was at least 3,000 feet high from its lowest edge to its highest point. Even the common people in Haizhou City knew that there was a mountain hidden in the cloud, and there were countless pavilions and palaces on the mountain. In Haizhou City, common people could often be seen kneeling on the ground and kowtowing to that massive cloud. This was the cloud platform. In the deepest part of the cloud platform's cliff, there was a very quiet room. It was very difficult for the sunlight from the outside world to reach this place, so there were many luminous pearls inlaid on the stone walls. The soft light made it more suitable for reading. Perhaps it was for this reason that the shelves in the room were lined with books, and the table was piled with scrolls of different lengths. Sitting behind the table, Lu Shisui would pick up a scroll from time to time and unfold it, reading it with a serious expression. Then, he would write something down on a piece of white paper with his right hand. Who would have thought that the mysterious Bulow Lin was hiding in the Western Sea Sword School's important place, the cloud platform? No wonder the Orthodox sects and the imperial court couldn't find Bulow Lin after searching for more than 100 years. No wonder Lu Shisui could still live peacefully until now. Even though he had killed Lo Huainan, the head disciple of the Center State, and was wanted by both the center state and Aoyama. No wonder Tong Lu had made preparations in advance, and the Western Sea Sword School had searched everywhere. But he still managed to escape so easily. The light in the room dimmed slightly. Lu Shui looked at the middle-aged man who suddenly appeared in the quiet room. The middle-aged man was wearing a very luxurious black robe, and he had a natural air of nobility. He was Shiwang Sunday. Lu Shui stood up and saluted him. Chapter 234. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui said, "My injury is not serious." "Did you go to see Tong Lu?" asked Shiwang Sunday. "Yes," said Lu Shui. Shiwang Sun said, "In a sense, you two are brothers. Why do you have to risk your life like this?" Tong Lu was the personal disciple of the godly swordsman of West Ocean, and he had a very high talent in the sword work. During the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, the curtain rollers ranked him second only to Lo Huainan, indicating his prowess. Although Lu Shui had swallowed the monster pill and cultivated the evil skill of the Blood Demon Church, he was still slightly weaker than Tong Lu in terms of realm strength. But he dared to put his life on the line. More accurately speaking, he treated every strike with his sword and fist as his final strike. Tong Lu couldn't do this, so he lost. Shiwang's son asked, "Are you angry because he told everyone that Jingjiu is a coward?" Lu Shui was silent for a while and said, "Yes, young master is not that kind of person." After a moment of silence, Shiwang's son said, "You defeating Tong Lu is indeed beyond my expectation." Lu Shui said, "That's because you taught him well." Shiwang's son said indifferently, "No matter how hard I try to treat you, it seems that the friendship between you and your servant is still more important." After another long silence, Lu Shui said, "Young master treats me very well, but this is different." Shiwang's son looked at him in silence for a long time. The quiet room became even quieter, and the light from the luminous pearl gradually faded. "You've only been cultivating for a little more than 10 years, and you've already reached this step. You truly are a natural-born Taoist seed. I was right to choose you, but you don't need to thank me." Shiwang's son said, "You already know all the causes and effects. It's fine as long as you don't hate me." Lu Shui remained silent. The Dace Devil at the bottom of the muddy water. That boiling hot demon core. The monster elixir contained the evil skill of the Blood Demon Church and the method to hide the elixir breath. All of this had made him who he was now. Last year, he found out that all of this was deliberately arranged by someone. That person was Shiwang Sunday. This was a conspiracy. The plot was simple and powerful. There were very few cultivators who could resist this temptation. Even though the scheme outside Nanhezha didn't work, Shiwang's son had made many similar arrangements in various places of Chaotian, which proved to be effective. Shiwang's son's plan was to lure a disciple of Liangwang Peak to be Bulo Lin's mole in Aoyama. He was satisfied that the disciple of Liangwang Peak was Lu Shui with natural Dao quality. What he was dissatisfied with was that Lu Shui did not know how to act. He was soon discovered and expelled from the mountain gate. He was a little disappointed at first, but then he realized that it was a good thing for an abandoned disciple of Aoyama to become an assassin of Bulo Lin. This would bring enough humiliation to Aoyama's sect. Moreover, Lu Shui's talent for cultivation was really too good, so good that he was a bit of a treasure. As a result, he brought Lu Shui back to Bulo Lin and observed him for 5 years. If it were someone else, he would have observed him for a longer period of time. But he didn't expect Lu Shui to kill Lo Huainan. From that day on, Lu Shui would never betray Bulo Lin. And for another important reason, Shiwang's son finally began to trust him completely and began to use him, even teaching him the sword style himself. But he didn't expect that Lu Shui would still want to kill Tong Lu. Looking at the young man behind the desk, the expression in Shiwang's son's eyes grew cold. "If there is a suitable target, I can help you kill him," Lu Shui said with his head lowered. Shiwang's son knew that Lu Shui was expressing his apology, so his expression softened a bit. Thinking of the case that Lu Shui was involved in last time, he said mockingly, "It's fine if you insist on not killing the innocent, but you almost lost your life because of the so-called innocence. A person like you is not suitable to be an assassin." Lu Shui asked, "Is that why you let me read, write, and practice sword work here?" Shiwang's son said, "Yes, because I need you to prove to Aoyama sect that we have high hopes for you." Lu Shui noticed that he said we. Shiwang's son flicked his fingers lightly, and a jade booklet appeared on the desk. Analyze their information and pick out the suitable candidates to kill Su Zai of the mysterious dark sect. The plan must be perfect, just like how you killed Lo Huainan last time. Having said that, Shiwang's son left the room. Lu Shui opened the jade booklet, and many words came into his eyes. Those words were the names and other relevant information of the members of Bulo Lin. Those names were written in blood and were hard to erase, and they were imprinted with the spiritual awareness. After the name was written in the jade booklet, it would be difficult for that person to betray Bulo Lin. Otherwise, if it was known by the outside world, he would be dead for sure. For Lu Shui, many names in the jade booklet were unfamiliar, and they should be the commoners living in the cities and villages. Some of the names were familiar to him, and they should be the figures hiding in the various sects and the imperial court. For example, he was looking at a name, Lu Xiang. Lu Xiang was a disciple of the second generation of the Kunlun sect. He had a high cultivation state and was good at the sword style of cold ice. Who would have thought that he was a member of Bulo Lin? Lu Shui browsed through the jade booklet, his expression unchanged. He had read many similar booklets, but the names in those booklets were more common, and they were far inferior to the booklet he was reading today, both in terms of the depth of concealment and the cultivation state of the names. He took out another piece of white paper, dipped the pen in the ink, and started selecting the candidates and designing the plan. The fresh ink words flowed out from the tip of the pen, turning into countless details of assassination. In fact, Lu Shui wasn't thinking about the young master of the mysterious dark sect at the moment, but something else. There were many things he wasn't sure about yet. He invited Tong Lu to a duel on the Chaotic Rocks that day. In addition to avenging his young master's anger, he also wanted to test his opponent. It seemed that Tong Lu didn't know he was in Bulo Lin. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so surprised that Jing Jiao could see through the sword style of the Hidden Tide. In other words, it was not the entire Western Sea Sword School that was controlled by Bulo Lin, but the branch of Shiwang's son? Shiwang's son suddenly appeared by the West Ocean more than 10 years ago. Where did he come from? Who was he? Why did the godly swordsman of West Ocean trust him so much? What was the relationship between them? Lu Shui put down the pen in his hand and looked at the outside of the window, the expression in his eyes complicated. In the past 2 years, Shiwang's son had trusted him very much, and he didn't hold back his advice on sword work. Jingjiu really didn't understand why Shiwang's son trusted or valued him so much. He drew back his gaze and continued writing with his head lowered. After a long while, the plan was finally completed. He blew on the paper twice, glanced at the jade booklet again, and put it away. The level of this jade booklet was still not high enough. It didn't even have his name. He didn't know who the real swordsman Bulo Lin had hidden in various sects and the imperial court were. Everyone in the cultivation world should have heard of those names. There was a big stone chair in the deep end of the grand hall. Shiwang's son sat in the chair, thinking about something in silence. Several rays of light fell in front of him, forming a light screen. He was hidden in the darkness behind the light screen, so no one could see him. Light footsteps sounded. A girl in a green dress walked into the grand hall and knelt in front of the light screen. "Raise your head," Shiwang's son said. The girl in the green dress stood up as instructed. She had delicate features and a gentle and pleasant expression. She was Xiao He from Ming City, whom Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu had met in Haizhou City years ago. Chapter 235. Don't use yesterday's chapter name. I'll use it again if I find a suitable chapter. Shiwang's son said, "I've only asked you to do this one thing in recent years, so I hope your answer won't disappoint me. Xiaoheving City was a bit nervous, saying, Jingjiu didn't tell him about me, so he didn't recognize me. When she mentioned that name, she felt a dull pain in her chest, as if the iron sword was still inside. Shuang's son said, Good. I hope he didn't notice you when you were following him. Xiaoheving City said, Please rest assured. I'm sure he didn't notice me. Shuang's son asked, What about you? Did you find anything? Xiaoheving City said, I didn't see him contact anyone, nor did I see that sword. After a moment of silence, Shuang's son said, Don't worry about it. Just look around. Don't make him suspicious. Xiaoheving City said, I understand. You don't understand. Shuang's son said in a cold voice, Even if you were a vixen, don't try to charm him. That child's Dao heart is rare in the world. I want you to be his fetter, not to climb into his bed. So don't use those tricks carelessly. Xiaoheving City was a bit uneasy, asking, What should I do then? Shuang's son said, Give him true affection so that he will feel sorry for you. Remember, the affection must be real. Having said that, he waved his hand to signal her to leave. The grand hall returned to quietness. The light screen faded away. Instead, his face became clearer. He didn't understand. The first child's sword was his master's sword, which was lost in this land. Why did it appear in the hands of Lu Shui? Was it the will of the immortal? Where did Lu Shui hide the sword? Why hadn't he found anything after so many years? Xiaohe left the cloud platform and came to Haizhou City. Ever since she accepted this mission, she had moved from Ying City to this place and bought a restaurant. Sitting in a private room of the restaurant and looking at the food on the table, she had no appetite. She looked calm, but she was actually quite nervous because she kept rubbing the bracelet on her wrist with her fingers. The bracelet looked very ordinary. Its surface was smooth and somewhat cold. Over the years, she had developed this habit. Whenever she faced a difficult situation, she would constantly touch the bracelet, because it would make her feel extreme fear. Fear is the best way to calm a person down. On an evening a few days ago, she met Lu Shui for the first time under the lanterns of the Four Seas banquet, and they naturally got to know each other. She knew that Lu Shui was the organization's focus, but she didn't take this mission seriously because she was very good at it. However, from the moment she saw Lu Shui, she began to panic. Why was that jasmine flower on his collar? In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. The sea breeze blew as usual. The man and woman under the lanterns might have changed, but the scene was no different from before. Aoyama was still the same. Tingguang Peak was still as high as before. Shanghai Peak was still as cold as before. Shuriwa Peak was still as noisy as before, and Shinma Peak was still as lonely as before. Same as before, Shinma Peak seemed to be isolated from the rest of the world, except that young sister Yushan would occasionally come to bring some things to Yuanchu. The disciples of Shuriwa Peak would bring their daily necessities to the bottom of the peak, and then the monkeys would bring them to the top of the peak. The people of Shilai Peak felt even more lonely because Shinma Peak seemed to have no need for books on cultivation. Yuanchu's initial state of the undefeated had been stabilized. Zhao Liu was still experiencing the changes brought about by the free travel state. Guqing's cultivation state was more profound, and he had a better grasp of the inherited heaven sword style. Jingjiu was about to become the one with the lowest cultivation state in Shinma Peak. It was interesting that the three of them would come to him for help no matter what kind of problems they had in cultivation. Jingjiu thought it was a bit troublesome to do so, so he preferred to teach them all at once. One evening, a scene like this occurred on the peak top. Jingjiu was lying on the bamboo chair. Zhao Liu was sitting at the end of the bamboo chair. The white cat was crouching in her bosom. Cold Cicada was squatting on top of his head. Guqing and Yuanchu were standing there. Master, since the third move, my sword source has had some problems operating it. It seems that something is missing when I work with the sword style. Guqing didn't find this problem until now. He had noticed it soon after he started to practice the inherited heaven sword style given to him by Jingjiu 9 years ago. Back when he was at the Precious Tree House in Chaonan City and learned the method of breaking through the formation, this feeling was more obvious. In other words, the inherited heaven sword style was sometimes not like a sword style, but more like it's a formation. You can think of the inherited heaven sword style as a kind of formation and adjust the operation of the sword source accordingly to solve this problem. Jing Jiao didn't expect Gu Qing to have such a keen perception that he had already discovered the uniqueness of the inherited heaven sword style when he was still in the undefeated state. Gu Qing asked, "Learning the sword style by using the formation method? How should I adjust it?" Jing Jiao said, "You can go to Shilai Peak when you have time and find some books related to the formation method." Yuan Chu didn't quite understand, asking, "The sword style is the sword style. How can it be the formation method?" Jing Jiao said, "The seven-plum sword style you learned originated from the writing style of Yamatsai, and the six-dragon sword style used by Gu Qing is related to the thunder method of the Ozawa sect." Yuan Chu asked, "Can all the cultivation methods be transformed into the sword style?" "You can think of it the other way around," Jing Jiao said. "Does it mean that the real swords of the 9 peaks of Aoyama can be imitated as some cultivation methods?" Thinking of that scene, Gu Qing couldn't help but feel fascinated, saying, "It's really hard to imagine." Jing Jiao didn't understand the confusion and shock of his two disciples, saying, "Didn't I teach you the principle of all-in-one sword during your first lesson after you entered the mountain gate?" Every disciple of Aoyama who entered the inner sect would receive a book called the Sword Scripture for their first lesson by the stream of sword washing. There were 4 words on the first page of the Sword Scripture: all-in-one sword. Of course, Gu Qing and Yuan Chu remembered it. But it wasn't until now that they realized the 4 words weren't just for show, but had a real meaning. The white cat wiggled his body in Zhao Liu's bosom. Zhao Liu thought of a rumor and asked, "I heard that there are other states above the heavenly arrival state?" Gu Qing and Yuan Chu were also interested. "The hidden heaven," Jing Jiao said. It became very quiet on the peak top. After a long while, Zhao Liu asked, "Should we go further up?" Jing Jiao shook his head, saying, "That state is only in the imagination. Even the founder of the sect couldn't achieve it, so there's no need to think about it." The white cat closed its eyes, seeming to be sleeping soundly. But in fact, it had been listening quietly. Of course it knew about the hidden heaven. It also knew that the state Jing Jiao didn't mention was called all-in-one. It was still the same words on the first page of the Sword Scripture. It was also a sword, all-in-one sword. The white cat was a little disappointed, because Jing Jiao didn't mention that sword until the end. Where was that sword? As spring came, the stream of sword washing became greener, and then it was dyed red by the wild flowers blooming on both sides. The Aoyama sect welcomed another inherited sword competition, but Shinma Peak didn't participate again. The young master of the Platana sect came to watch the competition 4 times in a row. She visited Shinma Peak again the next morning after the inherited sword competition. She was brought to the peak top this year, and Gu Qing brewed tea in an iron kettle. She was fully aware that this was a rare treatment, one that her mother and the Grandmaster might not get. She smiled contentedly, which matched her name. Recalling what had happened in the old plum garden in Zhaoga City, Zhao Liu asked, "How is the Grandmaster's health?" Back when Sensei De went to the old plum garden to see Tian Jingren, she wanted to ask when her mother would marry again. Tian Jingren told her through a child that he wanted to see when the Grandmaster would be tired of the human world. She kept asking, and the answer she got was 10 years. It should be about time. The Grandmaster's health is fine. Looking at the bamboo chair outside the cave, Sensei De said, "Someone was right back then. That old guy Tian Jingren only knows how to bluff." Zhao Liu noticed that she was no longer a little girl, but a beautiful young woman now. She pouted her lips when she spoke, looking quite adorable. Chapter 236. Zhao Liu was taken aback, asking, "What's the matter?" Gu Qing and Yuan Chu were bewildered as well. The sensei said helplessly while looking at them, "Though cultivation is important, can you two pay more attention to the significant events in the cultivation circle?" Zhao Liu thought that according to the Broadsword King, The Snowy Kingdom wouldn't invade the South in 100 years, and the underworld had been quiet recently. What significant event had happened? Suzai left the coal mountain and went to Ijo. He encountered an assassin in a restaurant who disguised himself as a customer of a brothel. The sensei explained the assassination in detail. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu eyed each other, feeling surprised because Zhao Liu was listening to them attentively. The sensei couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart when she thought of the ingenious plan of the assassination and the ruthlessness of the attack. Bulow Lin is really formidable, she said sentimentally. Is he dead? Zhao Liu showed an interest in someone, which was rare. She had heard of the name Su Zai many years ago. The young master of the mysterious dark sect had an exaggerated talent in cultivation, and it was said that even Lo Huainan wasn't as good as him. The sensei said, I don't know. According to the situation, he should be dead for sure, but nobody has found his corpse yet. It grew quiet in the manor cave, and the atmosphere was a bit odd. Lo Huainan and Su Zai were the two strongest swordsmen of the young generation in the cultivation circle, one orthodox and the other deviant. Unexpectedly, they were both assassinated. One was dead, and the other's fate was unknown. This was indeed a sentimental event. The sensei thought that the peculiar atmosphere in the manor cave originated from this, but she didn't know that Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu had thought of something more serious. Land in the southwest was a region of barren mountains and unruly rivers, with endless mountains and rivers. Rainstorms and droughts occurred from time to time, and there were few people here. Logically speaking, this should be a peaceful place that cultivators liked, but the problem was that there were no spirit veins here, and the scenery was not very good. Between the cliffs, a black shadow was moving forward at an unimaginable speed. No matter how steep the cliff was, it couldn't slow him down. The dry branches were smashed into pieces, the wet moss was trampled into mud, and the eagle that couldn't dodge in time was knocked away. The wine jug slapped the man's leg, making a popping sound. Arriving at a dark and dense forest, the man stopped and threw his companion to the ground. He untied the wine pot and took 2 big gulps before starting to pant. The companion covered his face with a black cloth and sat up with difficulty. He leaned against the tree and said in a hoarse voice, Give me 2 bites. You're already poisoned. Why are you still drinking? That person was tall and sturdy, with a full beard. Because he drank too quickly, the wine spilled on his face, looking like dewdrops. His eyes were clean and looked like dewdrops. Second in the world, Hejan. The man under the tree untied the black cloth and revealed his face. His face was green, emitting a faint luster like hardened plaster. He looked eerie, like a ghost. Hejan's expression didn't change. He must have seen too much. That person's voice was very hoarse, as if his vocal cords had been cut with a knife. The poison has made me so miserable. I don't need a few bites of wine. The expression in Hejan's eyes dimmed a bit. He understood his companion's intention and tossed the wine jug over. That person caught the wine jug and took 2 sips. Though he spoke freely, he drank very carefully without spilling any wine, appearing elegant. I don't know if there are any assassins of Bulow Lin nearby. All I know is that nobody is willing to help you except me. Hejan grew a bit angry as he said this, saying, If you had made more friends like me, you wouldn't have ended up like this. That person said with a smile, Why would I call myself a disciple of the deviant sects when I have friends? Hejan didn't bother to pay attention to him, saying, The Baotong Zen Temple is closer to here. That person said, Don't forget that I'm the young master of the mysterious dark sect. He turned out to be Su Zai. Your father has been paralyzed for many years after going mad. Now that something has happened to you, he should have a hard time protecting himself. Hejan said in a mocking tone, The mysterious dark sect belongs to someone else. You are still the young master. Su Zai said after some thought, What you said makes sense. What poison have you been poisoned with? Hejan asked with furrowed brows. It was well known that regular poisons had no effect on the cultivation practitioners, and the mysterious dark sect was good at all kinds of demonic and peculiar poisons. I can sense that one of the poisons is the corpse locust tree. It seems that Bulo Lin knows the magic methods of the mysterious dark sect very well. But someone else must have added something to the poison. Suzai said, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is that those assassins are really outstanding. Bulo Lin is really formidable. Hejan asked, why does Bulo Lin want to kill you? Suzai said, many people on the cold mountain don't like me, and those old guys at the sect have wanted me dead a long time ago, not to mention the orthodox cultivation practitioners like you. Many people can afford the price. How can I know who they are? Hejan snapped angrily. You know that so many people want you dead, but you're still so careless that you show up in Ijo alone. Suzai didn't respond to his question. He closed his eyes and started resting, saying, give me some barbecued meat to eat. Hejan's footsteps rang out, heading toward a distant place. Suzai's face twisted slightly, like a green leaf that had been rubbed together. It looked painful. He didn't open his eyes. It was dark in front of him. It was the bonfire that illuminated the darkness. Last year, the flame of the bonfire was 100 feet high, illuminating the dark and gloomy valley. This was the ancestral worship ceremony of the mysterious dark sect. A young man came out of nowhere and attempted to challenge him. That young man was severely wounded by him and fled. Yet, he didn't relax his vigilance. It was because that young man employed the most orthodox, demonic method of the mysterious dark sect. That kind of ancient aura with the meaning of time was so clear. He remembered clearly that the eyes of those old guys lit up at the time. He wanted to find out what was going on. As such, he left the cold mountain without hesitation after learning the whereabouts of that young man and came to Ijo. To keep his secret, he didn't bring any of his subordinates with him. Now that he thought about it, the clue was obviously fake. It was Bulo Lin who had given it to him on purpose. He could sense clearly that the poison was circulating in his meridians, slowly eroding his body and approaching the demonic fetus. He would die at that moment. That young man should have returned to the cold mountain by now and be regarded as his master by those old guys at the sect. What about his father? Was he already dead? Or would he suffer a lot of humiliation but couldn't die even if he wanted to, and his life would be even more miserable than it was now? He hoped it was the latter. Chapter 237. Hejan stood in front of Suzai, with no game in his hands and no intention of lighting a bonfire. It's too cruel to refuse the last request of a dying man. Suzai said this while looking at him seriously. Hejan spread his hands, saying, I have good news, and bad news, interrupted Suzai. Hejan said, the bad news is that there's no meat, but the good news is that I happen to meet an acquaintance nearby. Nobody would believe that they could meet an acquaintance in such a barren mountain. Suzai sighed. You're still willing to chat with me at such a critical moment. I knew you were waiting for someone from the very beginning. Hejan said apologetically, if you knew, I'm afraid you wouldn't accept it. I'm a member of the deviant sects, not like those old scholars in Yamatai who don't eat enemies. Suzai said, let him come out. I've always been curious about what kind of person this friend of yours is. Someone walked out from behind a tree. He was quite old, but his eyes and brows looked like a child's. Back in the chess tournament of the plum meeting, Hejan had almost changed to Sensei's camp with a barbecued fish. A person like him must have many friends in the cultivation circle. There were many kinds of friends. As far as Hejan was concerned, it was fortunate that his two most famous friends were his true friends. It was interesting that these two friends didn't know each other, and they should be mortal enemies in terms of camps. If it were before, Hejan wouldn't let them meet each other, but it was a special situation that day. He didn't know who else he could trust besides Tong Yin. Why is your face green? This was the first thing Tong Yin said. My father planted a demon fetus in my mother's body. The demon fetus survived, but she died. Suzai said, I'm that demon fetus. I was born with the corpse poison, so my whole body is green. His tone was calm, and his explanation was simple. Yet, it seemed that the darkest night had fallen in the wild forest. The mountain wind was bone-piercingly cold. Tong Yin was silent for a while, then looked at his face and asked, Why is it purple again? Suzai said, The corpse locust tree is mixed with the natural corpse poison in my body. As a result, the color of my body has changed. Tong Yin asked, "How long can you hold on?" Suzai said, "The purple perilla leaves are not ugly. If you soak them in a pickle jar in Ijo for 3 days and eat them with white rice, they will taste delicious." Tong Yin said, "There is no meat in the Baohong Zen temple, but there is rice. If I show up, there should be white rice." After a moment of silence, Suzai said, "If you agree that I'll pay for the meal myself." Tong Yin said, "Of course, but you don't have any money on you right now. You may need to find some temporary jobs." "Okay," Suzai said. All right. Aren't you tired of talking like this?" Hejan had been silent for a long time, but after listening for a long time, he finally couldn't stand it anymore. He cursed and said, "I admit that you are the smartest people in the world, but I can't beat you. I'm ranked 3rd, okay?" "No, you can only be ranked 4th. Tong Yin pointed to the sky that was cut open by the treetops, saying, "Jingjiu is above us." Suzai's line of sight followed her finger to the sky, saying with a faint smile, "If I can't survive, I'd like to go to Aoyama and see what kind of person he is." Spring had arrived in Chaotian, but it was still very cold in some places. In the barren fields, the yellowish moss could be seen. Once in a while, a few willows could be seen, but they were all barren after being gnawed by some animals. They looked like those rocky mountains in the distance. The cold mountain was indeed very cold. The breath exhaled by the people would turn into white smoke when they talked, as if they were holding a memorial ceremony. The internal conflict at the mysterious dark sect had come to an end. After a fierce fight, a young man named Wang Xiaoming was elected as the new young master by the elders. It was interesting, or rather disappointing, that the sect master of the mysterious dark sect, who had been paralyzed for several decades, was still alive. "You promised me that they would have a fair fight. Why did you ask Bulow Lin to assassinate him?" The short and skinny old man had a red nose, but had nothing to do with the cold weather. It was probably because he was angry. He was the famous hidden swordsman, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. After he came out from the sunless underground, he talked to only one person. Insan said embarrassedly, "I didn't expect your grand disciple to be so outstanding, so I had to do more." After a moment of silence, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "Now that Bulow Lin is so obedient to you, why did you kill Wei Chenzi back then? The murkier the water, the better. All I need is to achieve my goal." In San said, "Little Leu is a disciple of our Aoyama. It's not her turn to be killed by a useless person from the Zhongzhou school." "What is the relationship between you and Bulow Lin?" asked the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. In San said, "I'll tell you the day Bulow Lin is destroyed." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was even more confused about what he was thinking, asking, "Do you want to destroy Bulow Lin?" In San shook his head and said, "It's not me. It's those children who want to do it." "Why do you want to help them?" asked the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. In San said with a faint smile, "If my young brother were still alive, he would think these things are meaningless, but I like it very much." Having said that, he raised the bone flute in his hand. The flute sounded melodious, and the yak headed toward the distance of the barren land. The sensei had left. The night was approaching. The excitement caused by the inherited sword competition in Aoyama was still lingering. Standing by the cliff's edge, one could even hear the laughter of the young girls on the opposite peak. Back then, he thought Qingrong Peak was too close. White Ghost and Cold Cicada were sleeping in the manor cave. It was rare that Jingjiu didn't lie on the bamboo chair, but stood by the cliff's edge. Looking at the peaks of Aoyama under the starlight, it was unclear what he was thinking. Zhao Leu walked out from the manor cave and stood by his side. "I'm the most suitable person to be an assassin in the world," Jingjiu said. This statement was quite sudden. Zhao Leu recalled how the two of them killed Zui Yi on the Shinma Peak, thinking that it was indeed the case. Jingjiu continued, "This idea came to me that night when I was chasing after the snow-foot monsters in the snowland." "Are you trying to say that you should take on the role played by Lu Shui?" asked Zhao Leu. I don't know how to do it, said Jingjio. Because you're lazy? Pressed Zhao Liu. Jingjio said, because it's meaningless to do it. Why do you say so? Asked Zhao Liu. Jingjio said, as long as you live long enough, you will find that the things in the world are just boring repetitions, and no real change has ever taken place. Zhao Liu shot him a glance, and then pointed to Liangwang Peak in the distance. Just like Shima Peak, Liangwang Peak had only one mountain path. On both sides of the mountain path, there was an everlasting lamp every 100 feet. Seen from a distance, they looked like two parallel rays of light, rotating along the mountain and then rising to the top of the peak. Jingjio understood what she meant, saying, the path ends when it reaches the top of the peak, so we can only go down again. It's the same as before. Liangwang Peak was brightly lit that night, so that the new disciples of the inherited sword competition the day before could see clearly the treacherous mountain terrain at night. According to the usual practice, the disciples of Liangwang Peak, including Guananshan, Guhan, and Jian Ruyun, would lecture the new disciples at this time, but not today. It was because Yu Siluo, ranked second on Liangwang Peak, came out from behind closed doors and asked a difficult question. What's going on with Lu Shisui? His line of sight moved over the faces of his brothers. Nobody answered him. Guhan was a bit hesitant. Chapter 238. You should remember the plum meeting that year. Guananshan continued while looking at Yu Siluo. We young disciples sat by the Star Lake and talked around the bonfire the whole night. Thinking of that night filled with the fragrance of wine and ideals, Yu Siluo let out a smile, but the smile faded away when she remembered that cultivationist Lo Huainan was already dead. The cultivation tournament of that year's plum meeting was very competitive, and the winner wasn't determined until the end. The young disciples of the Aoyama sect, Zhongzhou School, Shueiyu Nunnery, Ozawa, and other sects were resting by the lake. It was unclear who roasted a lamb and took out a jar of wine. The jar was a magic treasure, so the wine in the jar couldn't be finished no matter how hard they tried. Perhaps it was because they were tired, or perhaps it was because they had formed friendships during the fights, but they had intentionally forgotten the differences and hostility between their sections. They started eating the meat and drinking the wine. They didn't use Zhen Yuan, so they soon got drunk and told each other some sincere words. From that night on, these young disciples had a common ideal: to lead the cultivation circle and even the human race to strive for a better future. For this ideal, they cultivated diligently and looked for more companions. Now, the number of them had increased. Yu Siluo remarked sentimentally, I didn't expect you people to do so many things while I was behind closed doors. Guananshan said, the real threat to the human race is the Snowy Kingdom. Even if the Master Broadsword King predicted that nothing would happen in 100 years, what about 100 years later? If they were regular people, they wouldn't have to think about what would happen to the world 100 years later, even if there was a great flood. But the cultivation practitioners couldn't, because they would live in this world for a longer period of time, and they were young, enthusiastic, and idealistic cultivation practitioners. Yu Siluo said, cultivationist by Zhao said back then that the human race had to solve the internal problems if they wanted to defeat the external threats. That's right. The deviant sects are on the decline, and the only problem for the human race is Bulo Lin. Guananshan said, decades ago, the emperor intended to invade the Cold Mountain, and the imperial court had a lot of disputes. Duke Dinghua, who supported the Cold Mountain the most, was killed by an assassin of Bulo Lin on the street of Zhaoga City. This was merely a small part of the history of the past decades. Yu Siluo said, it's very difficult to eliminate Bulo Lin completely. Otherwise, the commanders would have done it long ago. Guananshan said, that's right. Bulo Lin isn't a sect, so it's hard to find their headquarters. Old Lin might not even have a headquarters because assassin organizations don't need it. If we want to completely eliminate Bulo Lin, we need to completely control the members inside and then eliminate them all with a thunderous strike. Otherwise, the cultivation world will definitely be in chaos. Bulow Lin was very mysterious. Everyone knew that Bulow Lin must have hidden a lot of people in each sect, such as Wei Chenzi, the nascent sole elder of Zhongzhou School who died a few years ago. The problem was that no one knew who those people were. After a moment of silence, Yu Siluo said, "Then, we need a spy." Guan Nanshan looked in his eyes and said, "That's right. We chose Lu Shisui." Yu Siluo asked, "The problem is, how did you send him to Bulow Lin?" "We had some clues, and we had some suspects." Jin Ryun stepped forward and began to narrate the details of the story. "Back when we were purging the demons at the Muddy River, we found a problem. The devil pill in the ghost eye carp's body was attached with a magic method to conceal the energy, which was indeed a strong temptation for young cultivation practitioners. After some discussion, we decided on this plan that night and let Lu Shisui take the devil pill." Yu Siluo asked with a slight frown, "Who made this plan?" Sitting in a dark corner, Ma Hua raised his hand. Seeing the cold expression on his second brother's face, he felt a bit uneasy. He explained hastily, "Cultivationist Tong Yin made 27 plans in advance. The situation at the time was just right. Besides, it was young brother Lu's request. We didn't force him to do it." Nanshan nodded and continued, "What happened later was in line with our expectation. Young brother Lu's meridians were broken, and he was expelled from the mountain gate. Less than a year later, he was taken away by someone sent by Bulow Lin. Everything was going smoothly until that incident happened. I believed that he would get access to the core list in 20 years. Yu Siluo asked with furrowed brows, "Why did that incident happen later? We also don't understand why young brother Lu would choose to join the old ones and commit such an evil deed that is hated by both humans and gods." After a moment of silence, Guan Nanshan said, "It was my fault. I'll kill him myself." Somewhere in the depths of the cloud platform, a cliff faced the sea, so no one could see it. Standing on the cliff, Lu Shisui looked at the sea under the starlight with a calm expression. The first time he heard the name Bulow Lin was at the stream of sword washing. At that time, he had just entered the inner sect, and Jingjiu had to sleep in the South Pine Pavilion for another year. Big brother Gu thought highly of him and told him many things about the cultivation world and the sufferings that the human race had suffered in history. Many of the dark scenes were related to Bulow Lin. The officials of the imperial court were murdered for power, the righteous cultivators were brutally murdered for revenge, and the innocent businessmen died for money. In the process, more and more ordinary people died miserably. Bulow Lin might have colluded with the underworld demons. Such an existence shouldn't exist. But since it existed, it should be erased. This was something that everyone who loved life in this world should do. Liang Wangpeak chose him to go to Bulow Lin because he had a high talent for cultivation and was a new disciple. Like a blank piece of paper, it was easy for him to gain their trust. Lu Shisui was nervous and proud, but mostly because of his sense of responsibility. After swallowing the devil pill at the bottom of the Muddy River, he started to have a fever, which aroused many suspicions. From that day on, he suffered many blows. He was abandoned by his master by Rujing, suspected by his peers, blamed, and punished by Shangda Peak. During those 3 years, he lived like a ghost in Tingwang Peak, but he didn't suffer because his mind was peaceful. He only felt sorry for Jingjiu. On the day of the sword trial in Aoyama, Jingjiu severely injured Ma Hua and Big Brother Guhan, and even broke Big Brother Nanshan's sword. It was obvious that Jingjiu did it for him. Every time he thought of this matter, he would feel sad and happy at the same time. It was still the same even now. The sound of waves came from the silvery sea. The smile on Lu Shisui's face faded away. He had been prepared to spend a few decades to gain the trust of others. The death of Lo Huainan had accelerated the process. His status in Bulow Lin had improved very quickly, and the information he had access to was of a higher level. Now he had to make a choice. Should he wait a few more years and get more information, like the evidence of Bulow Lin's collusion with the underworld, or should he leave before he was suspected? He made up his mind that night. He chose the former, because there were still many important things he hadn't figured out yet. Did the godly swordsman of West Ocean know anything about Bulow Lin? Who was Shi Wang's son? It was rumored that Shi Wang's son and the godly swordsman of West Ocean were brothers. Shi Wang's son occasionally said that his status and power in the Western Sea Sword School seemed to prove this. The problem was that Shi Wang's son had suddenly appeared more than 10 years ago, and he hadn't been at the Western Sea Sword School the whole time. The Dace Devils in the Muddy River were Shi Wang's son's scheme, and there were many similar schemes. How could he control so many demons? It was rumored that these formidable demons were sent to Chao Tian by the underworld through the huge whirlpool. Did Shi Wang's son have something to do with the underworld? Why did he trust Jing Jie so much? Looking at the ocean under the starlight, Lu Shui felt cold all over his body. Over the years, he had always felt that someone was watching him in silence, watching every step he took. Chapter 239. The surface of the ocean emitted a silvery glow, looking like countless eyes. Who's looking at me? Lu Shui's face was a bit pale. The sword light broke out from his body, drawing a rainbow in the darkness of the night in front of the cliff and landing on the surface of the ocean, cutting those silvery eyes into pieces. Yet, everything returned to normal a moment later. Lu Shui took a deep breath and stopped thinking about it. He walked back to his room and started reading the files at the desk. His life in the cloud platform was actually not so different from his life in Aoyama. He spent most of his time practicing the sword work, and he spent the rest of his time copying and organizing the materials related to Bulow Lin. He read all kinds of files and jade booklets quietly and attentively. All of a sudden, his eyelashes blinked once. There were a few transfer orders that didn't seem to be problematic on the surface, and they were ordinary transfers that didn't involve a high level of authority. But he felt something was wrong. The light of the luminous pearl shone on the paper, making those inky words look even darker, like the darkness of the night. He lifted his head and looked at the sea of stars outside the window. After a moment of silence, he took out a pen and paper and started writing. The words on the paper were quite simple, and only he could understand the hidden rules in them. They were all organized and analyzed. He wasn't the child in the small village anymore. Though he was still innocent at heart, he had learned to conceal himself and view the world in a different way. The seemingly simple transfer orders and some related information formed a blurry and complicated pattern when combined together. It took him an hour to figure out that Bulow Lin would do something significant in the near future. But what was it? It took him a long time to figure out. For the next day and night, he sat in front of the table, flipping through the files and analyzing them with strange symbols. He would drink some water when he was thirsty, and he told himself that he would go to the pub to eat something good later when he was hungry. As the wisps of blood appeared in his eyes, he had finally come to a conclusion. Though he couldn't ascertain what Shi Wang's son intended to do, he was certain that his target was the fiend prison in Zhaoga City. What did Bulow Lin intend to do? Did they really collude with the underworld? Lu Shui picked up the piece of paper filled with words and crushed it into ashes with his hands. He got up and walked to the window. He rubbed his face with the remaining warmth of his palms and felt a little better. Outside the window was a new starry night, but it was no different from last night. He wanted to pace, but he didn't dare. He didn't know whether Shi Wang's son had sent someone to spy on him or not. More importantly, even though Shi Wang's son had trusted him, he still felt that someone was watching him. He was a little anxious. For this matter, he had already sacrificed more than 10 years of his youth and endured endless infamy and danger. What was even more painful was the inner struggle and entanglement that tormented him day and night. He watched as Bulow Lin killed people and did evil. Even though he knew in advance who Bulow Lin wanted to assassinate, he did not send any information to the outside world. Last night, he had already made a decision. He would continue to lurk until he found the names that were hidden the most and found the evidence of them colluding with the underworld. Yet, this time Bulow Lin's target was the fiend prison. Did he have to wait any longer? No, the human race couldn't withstand such a risk. Moreover, Bulow Lin had set the fiend prison as his target, which was tantamount to colluding with the underworld. There was no need for other evidence. Looking at the ocean of stars in the darkness of the night, Lu Shui remained silent for a long time. "So, this is it," he said in his mind. He walked to the stone wall and dismantled the formation. He took out those jade booklets and put them on the table. Based on some details, he had determined that these jade booklets couldn't be taken out of the room, but he had never tried to do so. He opened those jade booklets and started reading them for the last time. After the last name entered his mind, he closed the jade booklets and put them back in their original positions, walking toward the outside of the room. He didn't bring anything with him. Breaking through the clouds and fog, he landed on the island with the booming sound of ocean waves. Lu Shui walked into the ruined sea god temple and arrived in Haizhou City through the underground tunnel. He walked through the bustling market along with the crowd, and then walked into the restaurant. Xiao He had prepared the meal and was waiting for him. Lu Shui thanked her and started eating the meal after taking the chopsticks. He didn't say anything during the meal. Xiao He looked at him with a faint smile. The expression in her eyes was calm, but her mood was complicated. She was certain that he didn't bring anything out from the cloud platform. But why did she think he came here to bid farewell to her? Was he going to leave like this, without even taking a piece of cloud with him? The food was eaten up quickly. Lu Shui thanked her sincerely and got up to leave after chatting with her for a while. Seeing his figure disappear into the crowd, Xiao He felt a sense of loss. Different from what she had imagined, Lu Shui didn't leave Haizhou City. He returned to the ruined sea god temple through the underground tunnel, and then returned to the cloud platform through the formation in the darkness of the night, and returned to that quiet room. Standing by the window, he looked at the starry night, which was no different from the night before. He rubbed his slightly bulging belly, revealing a faint smile on his face, looking relaxed and contented. It was unclear if it was because of the smell of Xiao He, the taste of the food, or something else. Chaonan City was the capital of Nanhezu, as well as the most populous city in the south of Chaotian. Moreover, it was close to Aoyama, so a great deal of wealth had been accumulated there. It was impossible for the Precious Tree House to consume all of the wealth. In fact, the Precious Tree House had never occupied a very high position in this feast of wealth since the ancient times. It was a dozen clans that had close connections with the 9 peaks of Aoyama, and one of them had the family name of Gu. The Gu clan owned too many properties, so many that the clansmen sometimes couldn't even tell which shops belonged to the Gu clan. For instance, there was a trading company in the west of the city that specialized in selling marine products. One early morning, the trading company delivered a cart of marine fish to the old house of the Gu clan, and a large fish was delivered to the small kitchen. Strangely enough, this fish wasn't steamed, braised, or cooked. It was delivered to the dining table of the Grandmaster of the Gu clan as it was. The Grandmaster of the Gu clan took a small silver knife from the hands of the current clan master, cut open the belly of the fish, and took out a pearl the size of a fist. Sensing the faint spiritual energy in the pearl, the clan master said in surprise, "Even if this source pearl is not bad, why is it necessary to be so cautious?" The eyes of the Grandmaster of the Gu clan were a bit cloudy. He glanced at the clan master and said, "The way the immortal masters handle things is not something you and I can comment on. Seal it up and send it to the mountain." 3 days later, a case from Chaonan City was delivered to Liangwang Peak. Seeing the inscription on the case, Guhan's expression changed abruptly, and he informed Guananshan as quickly as possible. The disciples of Liangwang Peak arrived quickly and activated the forbidding formation to seal the cave entrance. All gazes were fixed on the case. "This is the inscription of our clan. It was delivered from the west." Guhan looked at Guananshan and said, "You know what I mean." Looking at the case, Guananshan asked, "But what does he mean?" "The pearl is inside," said Guhan. Chapter 240. Yu Siluo and Jian Ruyun eyed each other, wondering what kind of bead was in the case. Yu Siluo had been behind closed doors for the past few years, so he didn't know the details. Jian Ruyun had only participated in the muddy water, so he didn't know the details of the whole affair. Guhan cut his finger with his sword and let the blood drip onto the bead of the case. Along with a sizzling sound, the bead made of golden mud gradually melted when it came in contact with the blood. People became more and more curious about what was in the case. The case was opened, and Gu Han took out a bead the size of a fist, exuding a faint spiritual energy in all directions. This was a source chi bead of high quality, but why did the Gu clan act so cautiously? Gu Han picked up the source chi bead and slammed it onto the stone table without hesitation. The crowd was startled. Huh! The source chi bead broke into pieces, exposing the object hidden inside. It was a smaller bead, round and as big as a chicken egg, exuding a faint green glow. It was unclear what kind of treasure it was. Only Guananshan and Gu Han knew the truth of this secret, and even Ma Hua didn't know it. Of course, the Zhongzhou school must know it. Guananshan picked up the bead and recited a passage of the script in his mind. A dozen rays of light suddenly shot out from the bead and landed on the stone wall of the manor cave, turning into a blurry image, which then became clearer. It was the face of Lu Shui. He was still a young man at that time, with a dark face and clear eyes full of curiosity and nervousness. He must have been looking at the bead at that time. Seeing this scene, Gu Han revealed a smile. Guananshan also smiled. He hadn't seen this face for a long time. Then his smile faded away. The young man had become the target he had to kill. Then why did you send this bead back? As he was thinking of these things, the bead reflected new images on the stone wall, which had changed over time. The images showed the blue sky, a corner of the stone forest on the Tingguang Peak, and a few green bamboos in the manor cave of Elder by Rujing. These should have happened after Lu Shui returned to Aoyama from the muddy water. The scene suddenly darkened because the stone room was very dark. Not a single ray of light could enter. He didn't know whether it was the sword jail of Shangda Peak or the forgotten cliff cave under the cliff of Tianguang Peak. The darkness on the stone wall lasted for a long time. Guananshan and the rest were thinking about Lu Shui's life and were speechless. Gu Han sighed and said, "Delete this part." Guananshan waved his hand, and the image on the stone wall changed rapidly. The darkness was replaced by blazing light, like a wildfire that could burn everything. Seeing this scene, Jian Riyun's expression grew solemn, as he recalled what had happened back then. This was the sword trial of Aoyama, and it was the first time Lu Shui had revealed his demonic blood technique. Soon, the scene changed again, and they arrived at a small mountain village. The paddy fields were filled with water, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds. Next, Lu Shui came to the seaside and saw a dilapidated statue in the sea god temple. The scene paused here for a while. The expressions on the faces of Guananshan and the others grew grave. The light emitted by the luminous pearl suddenly grew dimmer, and the scene on the stone wall turned white for a while. Gu Han said, "It's the cloud platform." Guananshan fell silent while looking at the scene. A quiet room appeared in the scene. There was a window in the room, looking at the sea of stars outside. There was a table. Files and jade books often appeared on the table. Many secrets were written in the files. There were many names in the jade books. Once in a while, a patch of disordered rocks would appear in the scene, and the seawater would turn into countless flowers. Once in a while, a tranquil ocean would appear in the scene, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds, but was impossible to find the true tranquility of the small mountain village. The jade books in the scene were flipping quickly, and the names couldn't be seen clearly. It was obvious that Guananshan had done this on purpose. He put away the luminous pearl before the scene was finished. The manor cave was dark for a short while, and then it was illuminated again. The silence lasted for a long time. Guananshan remained silent. Gu Han lowered his head. Jian Riyun and the others had figured out what the luminous pearl was and understood what was going on. They were stunned, speechless. "What's going on?" Ma Hua murmured. Gu Han lifted his head and said he did it. Ma Hua asked suspiciously, "Did we really blame him wrongly?" Jian Riyun's voice suddenly broke out. "What if this is a trap set up by Biolo Lin?" Gu Han asked while looking at him. "What do you mean?" Jian Riyun said, "What I mean is simple. Now that Lu Shui has betrayed us and joined the enemy, how can we trust him? The scene is real, but the contents in it could be fake, like the names in the Jade books. How can we determine that those people are the spies Bulow Lin has planted in the various cultivation sects, and not the targets that Bulow Lin wants to frame? If we act on this basis, many innocent people will be killed, and the more dreadful thing is that the Orthodox cultivation circle will be in chaos because of this. It became quiet again in the Manor Cave. What Jian Riyun said made sense. If Lu Shui had truly become Bulow Lin's man, he could take advantage of the scheme set up by Liangwang Peak to cause internal strife in the cultivation circle, provided that Liangwang Peak still trusted him. Guhan suddenly said, "I trust him." Jian Riyun said tersely, "Don't forget how Luo Huainan died." Guan Nanshan remained silent. Have you ever thought that Lu Shui could only win the trust of the higher-ups of Bulow Lin by killing Luo Huainan and obtain the name list and so many important documents? Ma Huan narrowed his eyes into two slits. Jian Ruyun said, "So he hid it from all of us and used that scheme to kill Luo Huainan? Are you crazy? She is Luo Huainan. Stop arguing. This isn't something we are qualified to judge." Guan Nanshan said, "I'm going to Tingwang Peak right now. You stay here and are not allowed to leave. Anyone who disobeys will be killed by the sword." His tone was ordinary, but the listeners were awestruck. It would take some time to make a decision and prepare for such a major event. If the news got out during this time, Lu Shui in Haizhou City would be killed for sure, and his plan of 10 years would be in vain. Jian Riyun and the others understood what he meant and agreed solemnly. Guhan said, "I need to know when the scheme will be launched. Otherwise, I won't be able to inform him when to leave." Lu Shui couldn't leave Haizhou City right now because it would alert the enemy. The most difficult part of eliminating Bulow Lin was that it was difficult to catch all of them at once. However, if the Orthodox cultivation circles had already launched the scheme and Lu Shui hadn't left, it would be difficult for him to leave. Like I said, it's not something we are qualified to consider. Guan Nanshan patted his shoulder and turned to leave the Manor Cave. Guhan's face was a bit pale. What if the immortal sect master thought that some sacrifices were worthwhile? Ma Hua sighed. Maybe young brother Lu also knows that death is the best outcome. Otherwise, how can he explain what happened to Luo Huainan when he comes back? He believed Guhan's judgment. Lu Shui had done it. Chapter 241. Starlight shone on the sea of clouds. It was clearly nighttime, but it was whiter than daytime like snow. The stars in the sky were like countless dim suns. The stone monument had no shadow, and the shadow left by the scabbard was also very faint. The round turtle opened its eyes and its mouth slightly. The formless starlight slowly entered it. The sect leader stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down at the sea of clouds. He seemed to be talking to himself. Young people often have the idea of changing the world. It may be childish, but it's also gratifying. Of course you won't support it, but I don't think so. After all, they're not us. I just didn't expect that they seem to have blown things up a little too much this time. Since that's the case, I have a favor to ask of you. Remember that you have a friend over there. At the top of Shima Peak, the starlight was like snow. I told Ada to tell you clearly that I'm against this, but you ignored it. Now you're asking me for a favor? Standing at the edge of the cliff, Jingju looked at the sea of clouds flowing like a waterfall. After a moment of silence, he continued, "You know the relationship between that child and me. Let him live." Was this the condition of the exchange? Jingjiu left the cliff. Gu Qing was in seclusion in the small house in the forest. Yuan Chu was practicing his swordsmanship behind the mountain. Zhao Liu was beside the waterfall, sensing the world around her. White Ghost and Cold Cicada were sleeping. The cave abode was very quiet. His palm landed on the stone wall, and the entire stone wall seemed to split into two, revealing a passage. Following the passageway to the innermost part, there was a cave with a larger space. The top was empty, and that was the highest point of Shima Peak. Back then, his sword had risen from here and slashed apart the heavenly lightning. Starlight fell from the top of the cave and turned into a silver dollar on the ground. Jingzhou walked over, sat down cross-legged, and closed his eyes. The Dao tree moved despite the absence of wind. The sword discernment came out. The sound of the waterfall was like thunder. Zhao Liu sat on the green stone beside the pool. Her sword awareness spread out like starlight, covering everything within a radius of more than 10 miles. Silent, she sensed the most subtle changes. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. A sword sense came from the top of the mountain. The sword awareness was the divine awareness that carried the sword intent or was released by the sword. That sword discernment was very strong and clean. Even the sword discernment that she cultivated in the sword mountain was far inferior to it. This sword discernment belonged to Jingzhou. The sword awareness fell with the waterfall and landed on her hand. The bracelet vibrated and let out a buzzing sound. Zhao Liu did not compete with Jingzhou's sword discernment for control. She was curious about what he wanted to do. The bracelet left her wrist and flew into the night sky, turning back into the thoughtless sword. The bright red sword light illuminated the cliff, and the waterfall was like a torrential flood of blood. The wind blew, and the weeds by the pond suddenly fell down. The thoughtless sword vanished. A red dot appeared in the distant night sky, and then quickly disappeared. Zhao Liu leaped into the air, her clothes and feet leaving streaks of sword light. Every step she took covered over 100 feet, and she quickly returned to the peak. Entering the deep part of the manor cave, she saw Jingzhou sitting under the starlight with his eyes closed. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu also sensed the departure of the thoughtless sword, so they came to the manor cave. "What's going on?" "Sword traveling," Zhao Liu said. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu looked at each other in surprise. The thoughtless sword was the main sword of the 9 peaks of Aoyama, so it should be able to travel. But how could Jingzhou, who was in the state of the undefeated, withstand the consumption of the sword awareness of this level? Jingzhou had surprised them too much, but they were more worried because they couldn't be disturbed while traveling. When they saw a white ghost sleeping on the cold jade bed and cold cicada, who was awake but didn't dare to leave, they realized that their worries were unnecessary. Above the human world was the sea of clouds. Above the sea of clouds were the peaks. Above the peaks was the night sky. Above the night sky was the chaotic wind. Above the chaotic wind was the empty realm. There was no air in the empty realm, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had almost disappeared. If it was extremely difficult and painful for a cultivation practitioner to ride a sword in the chaotic wind, the empty realm was even more difficult. The cultivation practitioners below the state of the broken sea couldn't survive here. Above the empty realm was the thunder region, which was even more formidable. The thunder region was full of violent energy, and the heavenly thunder could be generated at any time. Even the figures in the state of arrival of heaven would come here occasionally to sense the principles of heaven and earth, and they didn't dare stay here for a long time. The thoughtless sword left the peak top and shot up into the night sky. Soon, it entered the chaotic wind, leaving a long trail behind. It kept speeding up in the chaotic wind. After a dozen seconds, it disappeared completely along with a thunder-like boom. The thoughtless sword entered the empty realm and couldn't be seen by the ground anymore. There was no air or resistance in the empty realm, so it was the fastest place for a flying sword. But a flying sword of a lower state couldn't withstand the cold here, and there was no nourishment of spiritual energy here. Even a flying sword of a higher state would gradually lose its sword spirit and become a scrap iron, falling to the ground. The thoughtless sword was the immortal Jingyang's flying sword of the fairy state, so it wasn't afraid of the cold. But how could it solve the problem of the loss of spiritual energy? The darkness of the night faded away, and the morning light appeared, dyeing the seawater red. The thoughtless sword had arrived above the sea, but its speed had slowed down a lot, and the blade of the sword looked a bit dim. It suddenly raised its head and flew to a higher place. After a few seconds, the thoughtless sword passed through an invisible barrier and entered the thunder region. The violent energy refracted the light into chaotic shadows, and a terrifying pressure could be felt everywhere. Countless heavenly thunders were born and died, and the lightning bolts thicker than trees kept flashing, forming a picture like a fence. The thunderstorm here was many times larger than the thunderstorm on the peak top of Bihu. The thoughtless sword dashed toward the fence formed by the lightning bolts without hesitation. Crack! The lightning fell, and the thunder roared, just like a storm in the human world. The thoughtless sword flew through the thunderstorm at a high speed, just like those brave sea swallows. There was a light buzzing sound. The thoughtless sword left the thunder region and returned to the empty realm. The blade of the sword, which had been washed by the thunderstorm, was extremely bright, and the body of the sword was surrounded by dazzling light. The spiritual energy had returned to its peak state. The thoughtless sword sped up again and soon disappeared into the sky. After a long time, a huge island appeared on the surface of the sea. There were countless divine trees thousands of meters tall on the island. It must be Punlai Island. After the thoughtless sword flew past Punlai Island, it entered the thunder region to absorb energy again and then sped up again. In the evening, a strange scene appeared on the surface of the sea that was illuminated by the sunlight. A huge hole appeared on the surface of the sea, and endless seawater poured into it. The edge of the hole turned into a spectacular waterfall. The huge hole was extremely deep, and no one knew where it led to. Even looking at it from the sky, one couldn't see the end, which was extremely frightening. Could this be the legendary huge whirlpool? The secret realm of a singing spring? Why did so much seawater fall into the huge hole day and night, but the sea level didn't drop? The thoughtless sword didn't know this question that had troubled humans for many years, and it didn't want to think about it. After passing through the huge whirlpool, it didn't enter the thunder region to absorb energy again, but began to slow down. After a long time, the thoughtless sword slowed down to the same speed as when it left Shinma Peak. It was already the morning of the next day, and the morning glow appeared in the sky. Chapter 242. The mountain blocked the dangerous ocean wind and the huge waves, leaving only the rain and sunlight to the world on the other side of the mountain. On the other side of the mountain was a patch of dense forest. Looking down from the sky, it looked like the fine hairs. Outside the forest was a patch of fertile land, the grassland looking like a green carpet. This place was many thousands of miles away from Chaotian, but the thoughtless sword seemed to have been here before. Without hesitation, it descended from the sky and flew toward that land. The southernmost part of the mountain sank into the ocean, creating countless sprays. Innumerable seabirds were flying and hunting for food, making ear-piercing chirping noises. The thoughtless sword hovered in the midst of the black, shadow-like birds, the tip of the sword pointing at the forest on the land, the body of the sword covered with a thin layer of frost. Flying at such a high speed between the empty realm and the thunder region would damage the fairy sword a bit. The birds here were no different from those in Chaotian, but the types of trees in the forest were completely different. The brown trees were about 1,000 feet tall, and the green leaves were very wide, looking like the fans used by the giants. Hundreds of leaves were stacked on top of each other, and a fruit was born in the middle of the tree. The outer shell of the fruit was translucent with a faint pink color, looking like a huge lotus flower. The ocean wind blew over with a rustling sound, and the edges of the green leaves danced like the waves. Along with a clear sound of friction, the outer shell of the lotus-like fruit fell off layer by layer, exposing the scene inside. There were a few humans on each lotus flower, holding thin spears with a metallic sheen in their hands, looking at the thoughtless sword on the surface of the ocean cautiously. These humans were different from the humans in Chaotian. They were all very beautiful, even more beautiful than the cultivation practitioners. They had long and slender limbs, and it was unclear whether they were men or women. Their wings were translucent like the cicadas, similar to the fairies in the fairy tales in Chaotian. A person who seemed to be the leader walked to the front and said something sternly to the thoughtless sword while looking at it. The thoughtless sword didn't respond. The leader of the fairies furrowed his eyebrows slightly and said something more. Two fairies flapped their wings and flew toward the mountain at the back of the forest, presumably to ask for help from somewhere. Many dark clouds suddenly appeared in the blue sky, and thunder and lightning boomed, but no rain fell down. The fairies on the tree let out joyful cries, appearing very excited. Hundreds of bolts of lightning struck the mountain range, occasionally producing dazzling sparks, but most of the time, they disappeared without a sound. The ground suddenly shook violently. Countless demon beasts escaped from the forest and jumped into the sea in fear. Huge waves rose on the sea, and the seabirds flew away in fear, leaving a distant shadow on the surface of the sea. However, the fairies on the trees were not afraid. They were still shouting happily as they looked at the mountain range in the distance. Their eyes were full of awe and worship. The mountains began to rise. Was this an earthquake? That mountain was going to collapse? No, the mountain stood up. So was a giant. The giant was very tall. When he stood up, the dark clouds were blown away by the strong wind brought about by his huge body, and the lightning naturally disappeared without a trace. His head was almost touching the blue sky, giving off the feeling that the sky would shatter into pieces of blue porcelain if he stood on his tiptoes. There were scratches on the giant's face, as well as some scorch marks. He looked a little old, as if he had gone through a lot of suffering. His eyes were very clean, full of innocence and curiosity like a child. When he saw the thoughtless sword on the surface of the sea, he smiled again. The fairies in the forest felt the giant's mood. They put away the thin spears in their hands and returned to their respective lotuses. The giant crooked his finger at the thoughtless sword, and his movements seemed a little slow. The thoughtless sword flew high into the sky, and after a while, it arrived in front of the giant. Compared to the giant, it was like a speck of dust, almost impossible to see. The giant tilted his head to look at the thoughtless sword, a little surprised and a little puzzled. Aga! There was another gust of wind in the sky. His voice exploded like thunder, and even the towns thousands of miles away could hear it. The giant meant, "Why haven't you left? I had already bid farewell to you that year before I fell asleep. I still remember that I was a bit sad at the time. Why did you come back?" The thoughtless sword vibrated at a high speed, making a buzzing sound. Then it danced at high speed in front of the giant, drawing all kinds of circles like the dancing of the wild bees, but much more complicated. The giant understood the meaning of the thoughtless sword. He opened his mouth wide in surprise, and the smile in his eyes looked like honey, his raised eyebrows wriggling up and down slowly. Aga! His deep and deep voice echoed on the surface of the sea, sounding like hundreds of whales shouting at the same time, causing innumerable waves. The thoughtless sword didn't stay any longer. It turned around and flew toward Chaotian at a faster and faster speed. Soon, it disappeared in the sky. The giant walked toward the ocean. Countless huge waves formed in the ocean, and the reefs were crushed by his feet and turned into mud, changing the color of the ocean water. An hour later, the giant arrived at the deep sea. The deeper he went, the deeper the ocean water was. The ocean water here was a few thousand feet deep, reaching the giant's knees. The giant kept walking forward. As the sun appeared above his head, a dark shadow appeared in the ocean water ahead of him. The shadow was the Luotian Trench, a deep valley at the bottom of the ocean. It was said that the passage leading to the underworld was hidden there, but it hadn't been discovered yet. The water flow here was extremely complicated, with dreadful storms all year round and countless formidable demons in the ocean. Even the cultivation practitioners in the Broken Sea State didn't dare take the risk. Only the godly boats of Punlai Island would appear here occasionally. It was indeed very deep here. The water level had reached the giant's neck. Looking at the surface of the ocean in front of him, the giant felt a bit nervous. Though he wouldn't drown, he was still afraid. In the next moment, the giant had another idea. It was rare for him to encounter such a deep water. Should he take a bath here? Yet, he hadn't finished what his friend asked him to do yet, so he decided to keep walking. From early morning to dusk, The giant walked in the ocean like a moving mountain. The fish and demonic beasts in the sea, and the birds in the sky, when they saw the shadow from afar, they fled in terror. The giant couldn't run. Otherwise, his head would enter the empty realm, and it would be uncomfortable if he couldn't breathe. If he ran faster, he could leave the surface of the ocean and jump into the thunder region. The feeling of being struck by the heavenly thunder was unpleasant. He knew it when he was a child, and the marks on his face were proof. He walked a bit slowly, but each step was a long distance. When the sun was about to set, he finally arrived at the destination of this trip. It was an archipelago shrouded in fog. The giant had been here before, so he knew the fog was strange. He couldn't blow it away, nor could he fan it away. He had even tried to scoop up seawater with his palm and pour it on the archipelago to disperse the fog, but he still couldn't do it. The giant thought for a while and walked to the north, coming to the side of the huge whirlpool. He grabbed the hard mountain at the bottom of the ocean with his left hand and reached into the huge whirlpool with his right hand. After searching for a while, he found an ancient tree of 10,000 years old. The ancient tree had been soaked in seawater for countless years. Its branches and leaves were all broken, leaving only a thick trunk. The ancient tree was about 10,000 feet long, but looked like a small wooden stick in the giant's hand. The giant returned to the misty island and shouted towards the distance. Then he sat in the ocean, holding the ancient tree of 10,000 years old, looking down at the islands. The images on the islands were faintly discernible. Some cultivators were shouting something in fear, pointing at the giant. The giant ignored them and continued to guard the misty island. He felt a bit bored and wanted to sleep, so he yawned. Chapter 243. The giant yawned because he was sleepy. The drowsiness came from boredom. He was bored because the people on the islands could not come out of the fog, and he could not enter the fog, and there were no ships or people on the sea, because before that, he had shouted towards the distance. For hours later, a strong gust of wind suddenly appeared on the calm ocean in the distance. The sail was blown like a child's puffed-up face, making whooshing sounds. The clouds on the surface of the sea were blown away by the strong wind, revealing the azure sky. However, there was the sound of thunder. It was the cry of the giant who had been distorted by time and space. A godly ship from Punlai Island was sailing toward the depths of the ocean calmly and cheerfully. This godly ship was preparing to head towards the archipelago in the sea. It still had to go to the even more distant foreign continent. It would return after 7 years. Such an ambitious journey was forced to a halt by the sudden gale and thunder. The owner of the ship walked to the front of the deck. He narrowed his eyes because of the strong wind and waved his right hand, signaling the winged pathfinders who were shaking nonstop in the strong wind to come back quickly. With a soft thud, the winged person landed on the deck and folded his wings. His face was still filled with fear. "I've been brought to the sea from the mainland for 10 years, but I have never encountered such a strange thing." The wind gradually died down, but the ship's owner's eyes were still squinting, giving off a feeling of wisdom and experience. He said, "This is Neptune's warning." It was the first time the winged man had heard of the sea god. He asked in surprise, "Sea god?" The ship owner lamented. "Back then, the ship under our feet was almost swallowed by the huge whirlpool because of the sudden descent of the astral winds. It wasn't easy for us to escape, but we hit an iceberg and almost sank to the bottom of the sea. It was the sea god who saved us back then." The winged people thought to themselves, could it be that the sea god is the hero from the other continent? But wasn't that story false? He remembered clearly that everybody in Chaotian thought the story was fake when it was told to them. It was because nobody could understand how the hero of the alien land could cross the ocean and rescue the godly boat that was as heavy as a mountain and a river all by himself. Only today did he know that the hero from the foreign land was not a human, but a god. Inform all the treasured ships and divine ships on the sea to return immediately. The shipowner turned and walked back into the boat. The winged one followed and asked, "Then when do we set off again?" The ship owner said, "Naturally, we have to wait for the decree of the sea god." Kunlun Mountain was similar to Bihu Peak in Aoyama. There was a lake at the highest point. However, the lake at the top of Kunlun was even bigger. It looked like a boundless blue sea and was called the Heavenly Lake. The cliffs around the Heaven Lake were covered in snow. It was very cold, but the surface of the water was very warm. It was said that there was a dormant volcano below. There was another saying that the spiritual vein below the Heaven Lake originated from the same place as the fire vein of the mysterious dark sect. There was a faint fog on the surface of the water, isolating the chill outside. Some of it was natural fog, but most of it was the effect of the Kunlun sect formation. There was an island in the middle of the Heavenly Lake that was concealed by the fog formation. There were countless lush green plants on the island, and there were immortal beasts swimming among them. The spirit chi here was extremely abundant, and it really was like a paradise. Hiwei, the sect master of Kunlun, withdrew his gaze from the cold pool and cut off the spiritual connection with the cold signal bird. He looked at the people in the hall and laughed. He was one of the leaders of the Orthodox cultivation circle, but his temperament wasn't so good. He could be described as cold and hot-tempered. Yet, he laughed at the moment, indicating that he was in a good mood. Seeing the smile on the sect master's face, the elders and disciples standing on both sides of the hall were startled. In the next moment, they started thinking whether they should praise the sect master's smile for being as warm as the spring breeze, or ask him why he laughed. Hiwei seemed to be in a good mood, so he didn't make things difficult for them. "You guys are very good, and I like it," he said straightforwardly. The people of the Kunlun sect didn't understand, wondering why the immortal sect master praised them when there was no plum meeting this year, and their sect didn't show off at the Four Seas banquet this year. "I heard that the mysterious dark sect had a mishap a few days ago." Hiwei looked at the middle-aged man standing in the third seat on the right. That middle-aged man was called Song Qianji, his young brother. He had a high cultivation state, and he was in the upper state of free travel according to the cultivation states in the south. Being on the cold mountain, the Kunlun sect was close to the deviant sects like the mysterious dark sect. The most important task for the Kunlun sect was to patrol the surroundings by riding their swords and pay attention to the movements of those deviant sections. Song Qianji was calm and alert, and his sword-riding method was excellent, so he was the most suitable person for this task. In recent years, he had been in charge of all the affairs related to the Kunlun sect. Many people have died in the internal strife at the mysterious dark sect. We haven't figured out the reason yet, but I think it has something to do with the assassination attempt on Su Zai and Ijo. Hearing Song Qianji's report, Hiwei's expression turned grave, and the disciples of the Kunlun sect in the hall were also startled. Su Zai, who was regarded as the hope of the revival by the mysterious dark sect and most of the deviant sects, was dead? Why couldn't the curtain rollers confirm it until now? "I want to go and have a look," Hiwei said. Song Qianji was taken aback a bit, saying, "Big brother, why do you have to go in person for such a trivial matter?" Hiwei glanced at him in disgust, saying, "If you could figure it out, I wouldn't have to go in person." It was quiet in the hall. The disciples of the Kunlun sect lowered their heads, saying nothing. They all knew that their sect master didn't like Senior Master Song, though they didn't know why. The sword light fell down. This place was more than 1,000 miles away from Kunlun Mountain, and it was in the most desolate and dangerous part of the cold mountain. There was a deep and gloomy valley among the mountains. The rocks on the mountain were red, exuding a faint bloody smell, giving off an evil feeling. In the deepest part of the valley was the headquarters of the mysterious dark sect, and the fire source was at the bottom of the valley, which was even fiercer than the one at the bottom of Kunlun Mountain. However, without the heavenly pond to neutralize the fire, it was easy to go mad while cultivating here. The reason the mysterious dark sect chose this place as their headquarters was because they had some evil methods in the demonic magic inherited from their ancestors that could solve this problem. Hiwei looked in the direction of the valley expressionlessly, having no intention of going there. The power of the deviant sects had declined in the last few hundred years, but the mysterious dark sect had existed for thousands of years and had profound resources. No matter how weak they were, it was impossible for the orthodox cultivation practitioners to break into their headquarters. Even from a distance of 10 miles, he could sense the hidden lethal intent in the valley. So he knew that it was the rumored great formation of 10,000 banners. Song Qinji glanced at him, wondering if he could figure out more by looking at it from a distance. He Wei suddenly asked, "Do you know why I'm so happy today?" Song Qinji thought no one knew, so he replied with a respectful expression, "I think our sect is going to have a happy event." "That's right. Bilo Lin is so cunning that he has only planted 2 spies in our sect, you and Lu Xiang. I'm very satisfied with this." He Wei patted Song Qinji's shoulder. A transparent lapis lazuli sword appeared in his palm. Song Qinji let out a horrible scream. Chapter 244. Since the Platonist sect knew that Su Zai had been assassinated in Ezhou, there was no reason that the Kunlun sect didn't know about it until today. I'll revise it after this chapter is updated. Of course, this is only a minor issue, so you don't have to read it again. It seems that the secret that I don't have a manuscript has been exposed, so it's not easy for me. Students, I'm under a lot of pressure every day. I think you won't mind if I play around with the title of the chapter today. Crack, 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 crack. Amid the dreadful screams, Song Qinji called out his magic treasure and leaped into the sky, leaving a trail of blood behind him. The glazed sword hovered in the air, not pursuing him. Looking at the bloody rain, He Wei showed a cold expression in his eyes. Song Qinji's body was pierced through, and his Dao tree and sword pill were destroyed. There was no sign of life left in him. He fell to the ground after flying 100 feet, no longer breathing. He Wei waved his sleeve a few times, and a few sparks drifted over and turned into a blazing flame, burning Song Qinji's corpse to ashes in an instant. It was still quiet in the bloody valley 10 miles away. The people of the mysterious dark sect should have already found out what had happened here, but nobody came out to check it out. It was hard for the mysterious dark sect to find a swordsman who could resist He Wei directly. He Wei leaped up in the air with his sleeve tousling. Soon, he arrived at a high altitude in the sky. The bloody valley became a red line in his vision, and the boundless cold mountain was under his feet. A jade-like glow appeared in the eastern sky, its energy profound and mysterious. It was hard to perceive its cultivation state. He Wei squinted slightly and bowed in that direction. "Greetings, Bai Junren. No need to be so polite, cultivationist he." A mild voice came out from the jade-like glow. He Wei said nothing more. He sat on the cloud with his legs crossed, recuperating with his eyes closed. The cold mountain was still as quiet as before. No signs of activity could be seen within a radius of several thousand square miles, save for the occasional Mongolian goat among the wild grass and the cold willows. Of course, what he saw was not entirely true. This was the most dangerous place in Chaotian. It was unclear how many demons and devils were hiding in the deep and gloomy valleys, behind the formations and under the ground. If it had been any other cultivator, they would have been attacked by He Wei arrogantly looking down from above. However, He Wei's realm was too strong, and the people of the evil sects were not willing to provoke him. Most importantly, the wife of the head of Zhongzhou School was here. Who would dare to come out and court death? The deepest part of the Scarlet Canyon was still a plain and dry cliff, but there were many buildings on the cliff protected by the formation. Compared to the Xianin sect's headquarters that was destroyed by Aoyama's sect, the current Xianin sect's headquarters was far inferior in every aspect. However, it was still very difficult to break through. The pillars of the Darkeen Palace were made of black jade and emitted a faint smell of blood. There was also some sort of dryness hidden deep within. In the deepest part of the hall was a curtain made of heavenly blood pearls, and behind it was a soft couch. A middle-aged man was lying on the bed, exuding an elegant aura, his eyes and brows sharp. He was the sect master of the mysterious dark sect, Suchiga. He had been paralyzed for many years because of going mad, but he was still alive after the internal strife at the mysterious dark sect. Gallia was the only remaining elder of the seventh generation at the mysterious dark sect. He was very thin, his cheeks dry, as if he had lost all of his vitality. However, if one looked into the deep part of his eyes, one would find a strong ambition and desire. Looking at the two blinding white glows on the formation diagram, he asked with a grave expression, "Sect Master, what do you think?" Suchiga glanced at Gallia once and said nonchalantly, "Since it is by Junrin who is going to do it himself, what else can we do? All we can do is wait for our death." Gallia sneered. "If these old scoundrels could break the great formation of 10,000 banners, our sect would have been wiped out a long time ago, and we wouldn't have to wait until today." Suchiga closed his eyes, saying no more. Gallia looked at the young man and said solemnly, "Don't be afraid, young master. Even the heavenly arrival ferryman can't break the great formation of our mountain gate." The young man walked slowly to the window and looked at the reddened sky due to the heat of the fire source. "What do that by Junrin and the sect master of Kunlun intend to do?" he asked. "They must have learned of what had happened at the gate a few days ago, so they came here to demonstrate their strength. As the saying goes, the orthodox and deviant sects can't coexist. Young master, you have to get used to this kind of situation." Gallia said this while looking at the back of the young man, a mocking expression showing in his eyes. "You're merely a puppet, so why are you thinking about these things? Do you really think you are the master of the mysterious dark sect?" The young man turned around. It turned out that he was Shi Fengchen's adopted son, Wang Xiaoming. It was unclear what kind of fortuitous encounter he had after he left Zhaoga City that allowed him to practice the deviant methods and become the young master of the mysterious dark sect. He didn't see the mocking expression in Gao Ye's eyes a moment ago, but it didn't stop him from coming up with the idea that this person should be killed. Then, he looked at the sect master of the mysterious dark sect, Su Chiga, wondering if he should kill this person. The devil men of the deviant sects on the cold mountain had all sensed the arrival of the sect master of the Kunlun, He Wei, and the principal of the Zhongzhou school by Junrin. They didn't know why these two important figures of the orthodox sects showed up here or what they wanted to do, but fear never needed a reason. The sects with the great formations of their mountain gates increased the strength of their formations as fast as they could, and the free-traveling practitioners who didn't have to flee to the underground. Those remaining members of the Bloody Demon Church who had been hiding for many years tried their best to fly to the deep part of the underground caves, even though they knew it was dangerous ahead. There were innumerable caves under Chaotian, many of which could lead to the underworld. However, the passages were too narrow and the natural forbidding formations were too strong, so only the weakest traveling souls could pass through them. The powerful devil men, like the disciples of the underworld master, could only appear in the human world by projecting themselves, like what had happened in the Mingsue Valley. There were only a few places that could be called the passage between the ground and the underworld. Besides the well-known huge whirlpool, another place was the Gathered Soul Valley on the Coal Mountain. However, it had been sealed off by the Zhongzhou school many years ago, and only some lucky devil men of the underworld could pass through it occasionally. The other place was not far away from the East Ocean. There was a pit in the Green Valley. The pit was deep and gloomy, its bottom unknown. This place was called the Heavenly Well. No practitioner knew why it was called by this name. Shui Yu Nunnery lived on the mountain a few miles away from the Heavenly Well, so he could suppress the devil men of the underworld who came out from the well at any time. To put it more precisely, the outstanding divine nun of the East Ocean built this Shui Yu Nunnery here many years ago in order to suppress the devil men of the underworld. Chaotian had been peaceful for more than 200 years. The activities of the underworld had decreased significantly, and they had almost disappeared in the last few decades. The Heavenly Well had been quiet for many years. One spring day, the quietness here was suddenly broken. A dozen disciples of Shui Yu Nunnery escorted a small green curtained sedan to the well. In the sedan was the great grandmaster of Shui Yu Nunnery. A moment later, the golden cloud rose against the morning sunlight, and the lotus boat landed slowly. The chief monk of the Guochang Temple and the principal justice, Master Dohai, led 18 ascetic monks to the side of the heavenly well. The recitation of the scripts rang out, echoing in the green valley. The scripts, emitting a faint golden glow, formed a net that looked like a kasaya, drifting slowly toward the pit. Countless sizzling sounds rang out in the heavenly well, as if cold water had been poured on a burning hot knife. Countless traveling souls had died instantly. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.